This is VOCM Open Line. Call 709-273-5211 or 1-888-590-8626. The views and opinions of this program are not necessarily those of this station. The biggest conversation in Newfoundland and Labrador starts now. Here's VOCM Open Line host Paddy Daly.
Well, all right, and good morning to you. Thank you very much for tuning into the program. It's Monday, March the 11th. This is Open Line. I'm your host, Paddy Daly, and David Williams. He's produced the program. If you're in the St. John's metro region, the number to dial to get in the queue and on the air, 709-273-5211. Elsewhere, it's toll-free long distance, 1-888-590-VOCM, which is 8626. So you don't need me to tell you Dave's all broke up, so am I. What a dump of snow we had. We just should thank our lucky stars we had those couple of days of melting to make room for this 90 centimetres they got out in Kilbride. So generally over the weekends there's a theme or two that pops up in my email inbox. This weekend, snow clearing. Absolutely bombarded with snow, and emails regarding what people are criticising is the pace with which the snow was removed. But anyway, you want to take it on. And here comes more weather. Lots of rain and wind and maybe some more snow. So if you got a storm drain around your property, make sure that's cleared out today. And of course, daylight saving time. I mean, I don't know why we still do it. There's only a few countries in the world that actually adhere to daylight saving time. So it's back in 1895, a New Zealand scientist named George Vernon Hudson and a British builder named William Willett. They presented a paper to the Wellington Philosophical Society, and then no one acted on it just then, but it was really popularized in Germany in 1916 as a War Measure Act. The Americans did the same in 1918. But the first place to recognize daylight saving time in the world? Thunder Bay, Ontario, right here in Canada, back in 1908. So there's a bunch of provinces that have, settled and solved the fact that this is not really a meaningful issue and a meaningful change that we do to ourselves, the fall back and spring forward, but daylight saving time. And it comes with associated health risks and, heightened incidences of car accidents and the like. So I don't know. I think it's silly, but what do you think? All right, it's fun to settle in on a Saturday night, watch Montreal and Toronto play. Even better when young Alex Hook gets the score for the Habs in a loss. He's 10th of the season. He's looking pretty good. And the Growlers, they are playing their game that was postponed from Friday night to tonight, a split over the weekend with Idaho. But it's what interesting. This is a Hypertowny note. The City of St. John's has been ordered to release the details regarding the settlement they struck between the ownership group of the Growlers and St. John's Sports and Entertainment. Forever and a day they said they would not, and now they're going to be forced to release those details, which I am anxiously awaiting. You want to take it on? We can do it. Oh, what else happened in sports on the weekend? Man, oh man. I guess we're just numb to the fact that Brad Guzzo and his team were so good. The world champions, although once only as a world champion, Olympic gold medalist, and now 6 Briers. So the team, Jeff Walker, E.J. Harnden, Mark Nichols, and Brad Guzzo, very likely can be associated with the greatest of all time. He was already the winningest skip, but now the three of them, remove Harnden because he's got his 3rd title, 2nd in a row with Guzzo, but Walker, Nichols, and Guzzo have 6 Briers. I mean, that's simply amazing stuff. And I don't know if we really sit back and think about just how amazing an accomplishment this is. He broke the ice back in 2017 down at Mile 1, as it was called at that time. 6 titles in 8 years. The Brier, arguably the hardest curling tournament to win in the world, given the depth of the field. So, hearty congratulations to the 4 lads and everyone who supports them, whether it be with their trainers and their coaches and the like, but I'm just simply blown away. I mean, I love watching curling. I'm terrible at it. I've only played it a few times ever. And it's extremely difficult sport, but those guys make it look easy. So in Saskatchewan, beat the hometown team 9-5 for his 6th title. Absolutely extraordinary stuff. And off to the Worlds they go. Best of luck to them. Couple of randoms. Okay, so it was on this date in 1912. They used to play NHL hockey games with 2 30-minute halves. The first Stanley Cup game ever to be played with 3 20-minute periods happened on this date in 1912. Quebec beat Moncton 9-3 on the way to a series sweep. And on this date in 1986, New York Islanders' Mike Bossy became the first NHLer to score 50 goals in 9 straight seasons. Even the most prolific goal scorer in the history of the league, Wayne Gretzky, only able to manage that on 8 occasions, 8 straight for the great one. And this one just to lead us into some seafood talk. On this date in 1997, Paul McCartney was knighted by Queen Elizabeth for being the most successful musician, composer in popular music history. He sold over 1 million albums between his time with the Beatles and his solo career. And in this province, many people were harking back to that completely ridiculous interview that was on CNN between Paul McCartney and then Premier Danny Williams. It was all about the seal hunt protest, right? And so McCartney mistakenly thought that he was actually in this province when he was on PEI. So, anyway, knighted on this date in 1997. Speaking of seafood, and maybe some talk about seals, which I doubt, at the Boston Seafood Expo. Interestingly, the opposition, look, it's their job to hold the government to account. I totally get it, critically important role. They're bemoaning the fact that Premier Fury is in Boston attending the Seafood Expo. It's a classic case of damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you don't go, then you don't care about expanding the market for the fishery. If you stay, then you don't care about the fishery. If you go, you're abandoning the sitting in the legislature, concerns regarding the fishery, and anything else that's ongoing here in the province. So, anyway, on that front, it's around the corner where we're going to have to figure out whether or not there can be some sort of agreement with pricing snow crab. We all know what happened last year. It's completely contentious. I'm not so sure that fracture can ever be totally healed. But that, and if you want to talk about redfish allocation or what have you. Speaking of Premier Travels, so we've had many conversations about these proposals regarding wind, hydrogen, ammonia, export power. So next week in Hamburg, Germany, there's a hydrogen energy conference. Premier Fury will be attending, we're told. In addition to that, Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston will also be there. So if you want to bring forward any of your thoughts on these wind proposals, we can do it. Got a couple of interesting emails over the weekend saying that, we're here on this program, me specifically, with full-throated support for these proposals. I'm not so sure that's an accurate assessment of how we've approached that particular topic on this program. Not in just the bare bones of playing devil's advocate, but in the hopes for fulsome conversation. If someone calls who's in full support, absolutely to round out the conversation, to include all the points of view, get all the issues on the table, then we'll talk about environmental concerns. If someone calls in complete opposition too, we will take, not just again for the purpose of being the devil's advocate, for just to have a well-rounded conversation. But if you want to take it on, we can do it. Sticking with energy for a second, had Minister Parsons on the program, I think it was last week, talking about what went on up in Toronto at a mining conference. And then there's a big story internationally about the price of the minerals, involved with building batteries for electric vehicles, your laptop, your cell phone, and the like. Minister Parsons said that we're still well positioned, and of course we are. We've got the minerals. Then there's an extended conversation about whether or not we're going to see the mines open, expand, but whether or not we're going to see processing take place here. We have done some of that, for instance, in Long Harbour. So we can talk about secondary and tertiary processing. But it's the price of the minerals that's catching people off guard. Last year, the price of lithium fell 82.3%. Nickel dropped 29.1%. Cobalt, 38.5%. Manganese, 22.3%. So while Minister Parsons thinks that, we can weather this storm, and I imagine we can, because we're talking about a one-year drop, but there's been subdued Chinese demand, less than robust expansion of the electric vehicle market, and other pressures. So when asked, Natural Resources Minister federally, Jonathan Wilkinson, is quite concerned. Look, I'm not involved directly with mining, but as so far as capital investment in the country goes, of course, mining giants and juniors will be hesitant to get involved until they see some signs that the prices will rebound to the tune of accommodating their business model. So that's going to be the trick here as to whether or not the investment will be scared off as a result of the prices. Generally speaking, that's exactly the case. So if you want to take on mining or anything in the energy portfolio, let's go. Quick break, 1 sec. We're back. Okay, what's this? Food inflation. A few things. So we can talk about the carbon tax. We know there's a hike in the carbon tax coming on the 1st of April. But what doesn't get included here is, we'll look at what people say is record profits for grocery stores. And yes, that's true. But their margins are pretty much the same as they were pre-pandemic. What doesn't get included in the conversation regarding food is, and you can talk about whether or not a carbon tax makes any sense, I'm up for that conversation, but it's the worsening floods, prolonged droughts, disease has played a significant factor in the price of the groceries that we all fear having to step into the grocery store because it is painful and it is frustrating and is extremely expensive. On that front, It's just remarkable that in a country as rich as Canada, just how many people are almost fully reliant on the food bank. You know, there's some 1 million people there's millions of people going to food banks in this country every single day. Then you talk about here in this province, about a quarter of the people in the province are food insecure, which is the highest rate in Canada. On that front, the leader of the NDP federally, Jagmeet Singh, is asking for a national school lunch program to be part of the April 16th budget. We know what the supply and confidence agreement has made. We know that's the only reason the Liberals remain in power. So they got what they asked for, them being the NDP. Dental care, pharmacare. Even though there's still a bunch of confusion and questions on both of those big national policies, is this one going to be one of those linchpins that will see the end of or the extension of the supply and confidence agreement? But we're the only country in the G7 without a national school lunch program. And with people going hungry, when we have a captive audience, especially when we're talking about children, do you think it's a good idea? Do you think it's required? The Liberals have kicked this around for years, have never acted on it. It's been a pretty empty promise coming from the federal Liberals. But we'll see whether or not this is going to be one of those requirements put forward by Mr. Singh and the NDP, but anyway, you want to take it on. We can do it. Oh, and speaking of schools, looks like the Lecturers Union has reached a tentative agreement with the university. Good thing, no details are released yet until they get it ratified by their members. But the university just could not handle another strike this year. It has been a long couple of years for Memorial University, whether it be the administrators, the staff, and yes, importantly, the students. So it looks like they have averted a strike at the proverbial 11th hour. Okay, a couple more before we get to you. How are we doing out there, Dave? Let's get it rolling. All right, so we know that there was a proposal to bring in psychiatric nurses to be part of the mental health care system, and that has been stalled. Why? Because there was no legislation to accommodate these psychiatric nurses, and they really are required. We see what happens in other provinces, the role that they play, and in this province, the requirement is legislation. Minister Osborne says that they're going to move from what was a pilot program to a full-time recognition, and that requires tabling some piece of legislation, which he says should be coming this year. Sooner the better. I looked around at how the other provinces utilize psychiatric nurses, and they are an extremely important role, and they fill in a ton of gaps which currently exist in this province. There's also concerns regarding the legislation and who would be the representative body. So you got the College of Registered Nurses and the College of Practical Nurses. There's some thought that there might be an amalgamation to arrive at one college only that could represent, as aforementioned, the psychiatric nurses. So I don't know why we were unable to recognize that when the pilot program was announced and to table the required legislation so that we could do it sooner than later, but we're told that they will indeed be coming. And we talk about some of the healthcare shortages, but I'm not so sure we've recognized in full the shortage and the gaps regarding mental health, mental well-being, mental illness, and access to not only upfront care, the wait times to see psychiatrists or psychologists, but what we're seeing like from Christy Allen and others, one of the greatest advocates in the province, what it means for long-term access to mental health care. Continuity of care, quality of care, wait times, we can take it all on if you are so inclined. I read this other story this morning, and I'm not really sure how to approach it. Let's just do the best we can. So I've heard from doctors many, many times that, you know, when families or individual patients are in their office and they've, you know, whether they diagnose themselves online or they see some of the treatments that are available that they read through WebMD and otherwise, and they're in demanding certain types of drugs, which has probably led to the overprescribing of antibiotics, number one. And they also talk about some of the big tests, MRIs, PET scans, CT scans, and the like. And many doctors will feel the pressure to go ahead and order these tests, all the while knowing that it's not going to mean a row of beans insofar as treatment of and possible cures for whatever illness or ailment is facing you or one of your loved ones. It's a tricky conversation. This story was basically about cancer and late-stage cancer. Oncologists who are willing to, you know, put you on chemotherapy to extend your life so you have more time with your friends and your family. But at some point, they're also including whether or not it actually makes medical sense and or if it makes financial sense. So far be it from me to tell people what they should do if and when they're diagnosed, and they want to see their life extended. But at some cost, physically too, right? You mean you read or hear stories where someone has been given the diagnosis, they're getting their chemotherapy, and as a result, they're quite ill. So extending the life by a couple of weeks or a couple of months at that physical cost, some people are choosing to stop in full right now, not taking any more treatments. And so oncologists, apparently, they're talking about common sense oncology. So as opposed to simply trying to give you whatever medication that is the traditional treatment, not to cure, but to simply to manage symptoms, to extend your life, and whether or not we're doing the right thing, whether the doctors are doing the right thing, whether they're doing the right thing on behalf of their patient and their family. So talk about a tricky conversation. I have no idea how my mind would handle or process such information, but it's a fascinating look at how, because we talk about wait times for these tests, we talk about access to treatment. We talk about the veracity of trying to extend life versus cure. So again, hard to know really how to approach this one. And I think we can also have that conversation regarding things like medical assistance in dying. And we just mental health care. There was going to be that added to the list, that if mental illness was your sole debilitating factor, that you would be eligible for medical assistance in dying. They have shelved that, saying that the system's currently not ready. So there's lots of moving parts there, because we haven't took out one illness or another and said, well, we're not prepared to deal with issues regarding the prolonged use of dialysis or your cancer diagnosis. But we have indeed, again, adding to the stigma, removed mental health or mental illness from that list. So, some of the psychiatrists that testified in front of the parliamentary committee said it's really hard to know whether or not one diagnosis or another regarding your mental well-being is going to end your life. But we know people can live in absolute misery, and some of the traditional treatments simply do not work. So again, when we talk about end-of-life treatment, whether it be for cancer or otherwise, medical assistance in dying, I know those are pretty big issues, but anyway, you want to take them on? Let's go. Quick one before we get to you. So it's interesting how some of the stories have been written about the murder last week. And a 36-year-old Syrian man has been arrested and charged with first-degree murder and kidnapping. He was well known to police. His wife lived for years in fear, being abused, afraid to tell people what she was enduring. So that conversation, it's always written how the Syrian community is shocked. I would suggest the entire community is shocked. We know the prevalence of domestic violence, and there's got to be a bigger conversation regarding bail being released on conditions. So it's one thing to tell someone who's being released that you have to stay away from your wife or your husband and your children. But if someone is determined to hurt or kill their partner or spouse, they're going to do it. So some of the way that we release people involved with domestic violence is just not protecting society. It's not protecting those who are the victims of their abuse. And certainly when it comes to a head where we see it end in a murder, we really have to have a bigger conversation about this. And it's not just inside the Syrian community. Yet all the stories are written that way. This is a societal issue. This has happened to people regardless of their ethnic, cultural, or their origin of home. This is across the entire gamut of society. So if that's something as difficult as that conversation is, if you want to take it on, we can do it. And the very last one, tax season, scam season. It never ends, right? So CRA is not going to send you a text. So there is a story out there now where some of these are really well-crafted scams. So they're getting a text message with the victim's actual social insurance number. So when you see that number provided by, in this case, they're pretending to be CRA, that means as a result of a hack elsewhere. So we know that it's happened inside the Meditech system, for instance, and many other examples. So just don't fall for it. Please don't fall for it, because it might feel very, very real that, well, that's my name, and yes, that is my social insurance number, but they're not going to contact you like that. So please don't click any additional links if you get that particular scam text message. We're on Twitter, we're VOCM Open Line. Email address is openline@vocm.com. When we come back, let's have a great show that requires your participation. Do not go away. Welcome back to the program. Quick traffic note. Traffic is stopped in the northbound lane at Columbus and Old Pennywell Road. Emergency services are on the scene of a car collision, so stay away if you can. All right, there we go. Let's begin this morning on line number 1. Deanne, you're on the air.
Hi, Patty. Thank you for taking my call.
Happy to do it.
I would like to discuss a possible solution for the cold storage body containers at the health science today. I'd suggest that instead of doing that, they have a celebration of life, like St. Clair's used to have, at their interfaith chapel. And this could be an interfaith chapel service with hospital chaplains, which are already contained and working inside the hospitals for the families. They could do a service for 2 or 3 of the families at a time, and they would have some closure. And then the hospital could incinerate the bodies at the hospital because they use this equipment for destroying amputated body parts, and then contact the funeral homes to make arrangements for vases or boxes for the remains. Now, if the families are finding it hard financially, which in this time a lot of people are, the government sometimes pays out $2,500 for funerals. Now, they don't give it to everybody if they don't qualify. So if it isn't possible for some families because they don't, contact the hospital foundation, take the portion of the money from the house lottery that they raised for funds, and say, we'll give you half of the 50-50 draw, and you can buy the urns or the boxes for your loved ones. Then the families can have the urns returned to them, and they can take them home or bury them in common land out in, say, Galway or wherever they wish. And if the graves can be marked with a wooden cross, like in the Field of Honour, that they have in place for veterans, at least then they would have a place that they could go and visit their loved ones and pay their respects. This way, the families have closure, the corpses have a more respectful burial, and people don't have to have GoFundMe pages because Canada's not a third world country, and they can have finished a complete package for dealing with their deaths without more unnecessary emotional turmoil for these directly involved. Thank you for taking my call regarding the matter. I'm glad that it's out there for people to hear. And I just want to say I feel that it's a very important matter and that people should try and resolve it as quickly and as respectfully as they possibly can. Have a good day, Patty.
The same to you, Deanna. I appreciate the call.
Okay, bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Yeah, that is an interesting story, and of course, not good enough. There's always going to be the possibility where the morgue is over capacity, and the solution is not to build a permanent solution like is now being currently considered by the government and the Department of Health Community Services. So I don't know exactly what the solution will be, but if it's cost, so there's 2 pots of money. $2,338 from the province. That number has not changed in about 20 years and, of course, does not cover costs. So whether it's an adjustment there, there's also another pot of money, the CPP death benefit, which is $2,500. If you're eligible for that, that comes very close to the cost of a cremation. And, what becomes the difficult part of this story is how to actually approach it, to not be simply reliant on dollars and cents, because we're also talking about human dignity. So what we're currently doing is obviously not good enough. So is it a matter of simply increasing the benefit? I don't know. It sounds like it's as fundamental as that. And whether or not inside that number, so the number we heard was 28 corpses in these 4 freezer units. And apparently the province didn't know, which is sort of hard to understand given the fact that everyone at the health sciences knew. Consequently, NL Health Services themselves knew. Why? Because there was invoices for the freezer units themselves. So, we really do have to factor in dignity when we talk about this issue, because it's not just dollars and cents, even though we know money makes the world go round. And when we're talking about health care and continuity of care and patient care, we always do include money. So as long as we figure out a way to do that in pragmatic fashion, we can absolutely have that conversation about what's happening in those 4 units outside the Health Sciences Centre, because that's an amazing story. Let's keep going. Let's go to line number 2. Say good morning to the Executive Director at Grace Sparks House. That's Lisa Slaney. Good morning, Lisa. You're on the air.
Good morning, Patty. How you doing?
Doing okay. How about you?
I'm good, thank you. Patty, I want to talk about 2 things today, and I'll be really quick with that. One is related to Grace Sparks House. Currently, we are doing a fundraiser, and not even so much a fundraiser, I guess, accepting donations. As you know, we have a new shelter that's being constructed, and due to cost overruns, with change orders and different things with the land, we're short monies on installing a playground for the children at the shelter. So we are a registered charity and able to provide anyone with a receipt or whatever that would like to donate to us. And some information about that can be found on our Facebook page. So if anyone is interested, anyone out there wanting to give the gift of play to some children at a very difficult time in their lives, we certainly would appreciate. Nothing's too small or too big. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Sounds good.
The other thing, Patty, I spoke with, I'm not sure if it was Linda last week may have filled in for you, or Jerry Lynn, I'm not sure, one of the ladies did. And I had called about the roads and how the government had put out for input from residents with regards to, what roads got put on the radar, I guess, for 2024, 2025 and going forward. So with that being said, I'm currently living in Spanish Room, which is an LSD, and another LSD that's just behind Spanish Room, Rock Harbour. So citizens came together and we did a letter and, had it signed. I mean, senior citizens were out in all kinds of weather and rain going door to door getting these letters, signed and sent in, and pictures and things like that. So I had a call from an official from Minister Abbott's office the following day, and it was a fairly good conversation, I suppose, in one regard. But again, it still leaves me with questions because I was told, of course, that LSDs fall behind, TCH and things like that. And I understand the highways need to be safe, but these LSDs haven't had any amount of work done in 31 years to them. So the official then went on to tell me that Spanish Room and Rock Harbour were already scheduled for the coming year for ditching and shouldering. So I don't know what they're going to shoulder unless they're just going to give us gravel road in spots, because there is no pavement left in some areas, and definitely no shoulders to be putting down crushed stone or whatever. And again, I told the representative from Minister Abbott's office that, I'm going to keep calling, I'm going to keep asking until someone tells me what this evaluation is. Like, we're all in a contest now. So he told me the best thing to do was to lobby your MHA, because your MHA is the one who puts forward what communities are, in priority within their districts. So now not only do we have districts competing, now we have communities within districts. So, if you have an LSD with only 200 people living in it, how can we compete against Marystown, bigger? Or how do we compete against someone who's already, outside of government? Like, how are you evaluating? Why did you ask us for input when you have already decided what's getting done in our area? And surely in all other areas of the province.
Did you say that MHAs are putting forward their roadwork needs for their own constituents or their own district?
Yes, that's what I was told, yeah.
Yeah, now, of course, that would be nature of the beast. They're there to represent the folks who either voted for them or against them, but anyway, they're their elected member of the House of Assembly.
Yes.
The problem is that we really don't. We should not pay a whole lot of attention to what MHAs think about roadwork, because therein lies the politics of pavement.
Exactly.
On the 5-year list, the priority needs to be assigned by civil engineers. They're the only people that we should really listen to about which roads need to be done the most. So there's some 12,000 kilometres of roads in the province, and of course there's going to be demands coming from every nook and cranny, because the roads, by and large, are pretty terrible, and everyone wants their road done now. And me included. In my neck of the woods in the east end of St. John's, even though I know most of that is city responsibility, there's some pretty atrocious roads. So when the MHAs are lobbying, as they could and should, it should not be which lobbies the loudest or who has the ear of the premier. That's really not how we should approach roadwork. And in that 5-year plan, there's always going to be a need for some wiggle room if, in case, say, for instance, a big storm and a washout. Obviously, that road has to be done first. There's going to be some other grey areas that have to be attended to. But when MHAs have more undue influence on what road gets paved, that's a problem for everybody.
Yep, and that's exactly what I was told. And again, if you've already decided what's going to be done in an area, if you've already got that scheduled on the books, why did you ask the public for input? Why did we have senior citizens, myself, whoever else, out going door to door, getting letters signed, taking the time to get it in, when we didn't really even have a fighting chance, when we're told LSDs are far below on the totem pole?
And who exactly said that to you?
The executive assistant to the minister, so Bradley George.
Okay, fair enough. I'm just curious what level of politics that particular utterance came from. Lisa, anything else you would like to talk about this morning?
No, that's it. I'm just going to keep calling until someone gives me a clear answer on how this is all going to be evaluated.
Fair enough. I appreciate the time.
Thanks, Patty. Have a good day.
You too, Lisa. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Lisa Slaney, the Executive Director at Grace Sparks House. Let's take a break. When we come back, Joe has concerns about mental health. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 3. Joe, you are on the air.
Hello, Patty.
Hi, Joe.
I was going to say the personnel at the Waterford Hospital is subdivided in my patient care, and the problem would be an overstatement of medication being drawn into my body. Syringa, bag of Syringa, and Abilify Maintainer. Abilify Maintainer was first given to me 3 years ago or 4 years ago. It was the first drug I was on. It didn't work that well. They had upped the dosage to 425 every 28 days, the shortest period of a month. Then they gave me a bag of Syringa to do. That was 525 milligrams or 625 milligrams, because they come in 525 vials of milligram and 625 milligram, and that's the only vials they come in. The nurses do not remove anything from the needle. Needles are huge, and these drugs seem to give me osteoporosis, vision blurriness. I told the personnel that at the hospital they gave me sight loss, cramps, stitches, pain, and put that much weight on me. It's not normal for me to carry that much weight at any time. I think I went from 189 to 250 in a month or two on these needles, and they're prescribing them wrong. The doctor said the day you take it is the first month, and 2 months later is the third month. They were given to me every 56 days. I took the first one in March. I took the second one. I took 2 needles in March. I took 2 needles in May on the 26th. I took 2 needles in June of 26, 2 needles in August of 26, and 2 needles in September of 26, and 2 needles in...
Okay. I'm not familiar with these drugs, so obviously your concerns as you just voiced them. So the doctor says what? Because I would have no earthly idea how to react to this, because I'm not familiar with the drugs and or the potential side effects.
Yes, the side effects have really bothered me. Weight gain, and 1 in 10 people don't make it off this drug, and they're not supposed to give it to people with anemia. I have anemia and schizophrenia. I'm not supposed to take it. I have diabetes. You're not supposed to take it. I have problems with diabetes. The doctor says I'm not a diabetic. And that's because I stated I wasn't a diabetic. They stopped diabetic medication. And another problem with it would be my psychosis that I'm going through. I can't get my thought pattern proper from the harassments that I'm going through in my own delusional world, or was delusional at all. The doctors probably brought that much delusion into my world. I hear voices. I close my eyes. I see visions all the time with my eyes closed. I see people walk into my environment. I've seen people, basically both good and bad people, and it doesn't seem to make any sense to me that I would be unaware of someone around me, although they're around me.
Well, I'm sorry to hear these issues, Joe. And of course, if you have some of these underlying ailments, which means you should not be on these drugs, I wonder how that would be missed by a doctor, or maybe I'm missing something.
This drug is really familiar to cardiac arrest, and I already have been punished with cigarettes because when I when I came off the drugs on my own, I thought I was doing. Everybody thought I was a little bit displacent, but I was doing much better. A few people that I was employed with as a personnel said I was doing much better, but I needed a little bit of help. Now, after 3 years of being on these drugs, I am terrorized with my thinking. I disappoint everybody by belittling myself, by making arguments with myself that I know I'm belittling myself other than others. That's the way I look at it when someone belittles you, and to me it's a favor to you to say either smart enough or change the way you are. But I think it's a compliment to be belittled most times because it gives you a better direction of life. And you don't have to be violent over someone saying that. You have to associate yourself as a better person to take the insult and laugh. So I usually laugh at people, or in myself, I usually look at people comedically funny, or their humor is satired, and it doesn't really bother me as long as it doesn't cost me a medical bill, or as long as it doesn't cost me a problem. You know what I'm trying to get at there?
I think so. Self-deprecation is a powerful tool. Joe, would you like to say anything else here this morning?
Just that I hope I can get finances enough to get a lawyer to get me off these drugs. I'm that well off in poverty that my family can't help me. I have my own help. I've lost all my family support, except for one sister. As far as I know, one of my cousins with my same name passed away not too long ago in Edmonton from a stabbing and a shooting.
Ooh, well, I'm sorry to hear that. Obviously, Joe, take good care of yourself. Hopefully, whatever help you need, I hope you get it.
Okay, thank you.
Take care of yourself. Bye, Joe. All right, let's keep rolling here. Let's go to line number one. Todd, you're on the air.
Morning, Paddy. How are you this morning?
Very well, thanks for asking. How about you?
Oh, not bad. But I'm calling in now, kind of spurned on by the announcement by government of dropping holding the excise tax on alcohol at the 2% level rather than the increase. And really just kind of wanted to bring up again, as I've done before on your show, the relationship between licensees, bars and restaurants who sell alcohol in Newfoundland and Labrador, the relationship between those businesses and the NLC. I think everybody, first I should say, I suppose, every province in Canada, everybody complains about the liquor board in every province in Canada. The Canadian liquor rules and the way we handle alcohol in Canada is generally not considered to be progressive or very, has been draconian in some ways. But I think here in Newfoundland and Labrador, we have a particular issue because the cost relative to other jurisdictions is significantly greater. So I think that, there's an opportunity for the NLC to, work with licensees in a better way than we do, because essentially, up until COVID, when COVID happened, the government brought in a 5% rebate on alcohol for licensees. But before that, if you go back 15, 20 years, if you owned a bar or a restaurant and you purchased alcohol, you actually paid more because there used to be a levy that was assessed. So there was an extra tax on top of alcohol for people who, sold it as part of their business. They got rid of that a number of years ago, and they brought in the 5% discount. But, you hear all the time people complain about the cost of going out to restaurants and whatnot. But, we're trying to sell on, with all of the costs, added to a restaurant, labor and, rent and everything else. We're trying to sell that bottle of wine to you when we buy it at the same price that you pay for it in the store. So it's a difficult situation. And I think that the NLC has room to move on this. You hear conversation about, cost of transportation and all the things being here on an island and whatnot. And, certainly there's something to that. But if you look at, if you dig into some of the numbers into the different liquor boards across the country, NLC and I guess, the government finance department has decided that the NLC is going to return a certain amount of money to the province, which turns out to be about 60%, roughly 60% of the revenue. So I think the couple of reports ago, NLC, the gross revenue was $350 million, and the dividend return to the government was $210 million, something like that. So, around 60%. The LCBO returns around 34%. So, government has really taken the NLC as a cash cow, which, we all understand the government needs money, but licensees being such a small part of this, of the sales, overall sales, I think there's a way for NLC to carve out a better discount system for, people in the restaurant and bar business who have been obviously hit very difficult over the COVID period. And there's not an insignificant amount of money to a small restaurant if their liquor, if their liquor purchases drop by 30 or 40% in terms of cost.
Well, that's where the margins are, right? I mean, I've never ran a restaurant, but I do know, with having friends in the industry such as yourself, it's one thing to be able to make some profits on the food, but where they really have an opportunity is to make it on the liquor. I think that's an accurate assessment, is it, Todd?
Well, it's true, and I guess really the thrust of this argument at this point, given the stats that you hear from Restaurants Canada and others, and those of us who have lived it, something close to 60% of the restaurants in Canada right now are breaking even or losing money. So we're not talking about, what I'm proposing or what I'm talking about should be a bigger conversation is not about restaurants making more money. It's about making it more easy for them to stay in business, because that is the point that we're getting to now. And I think that, you can go through the NLC and, pick off products individually off the shelf and compare them to other jurisdictions across the country and see significant differences in price. Now, some of them are similar, but overall, there's probably a 30 to 40, maybe even plus difference in pricing. I mean, I was on the old Twitter box the week, and there's a can of cider that is very popular here. At the NLC is $6.72, and at the LCBO is $4.30 on one can. It's like two something dollars. So a tourist comes down here from Ontario and, is used to paying in the restaurant what we pay at the liquor store to buy it. So it makes us non-competitive when you want to talk about tourism. I mean, people come down here from other parts of the country and they look at the prices in the restaurants. And I mean, I get it. I mean, I'm on the other end of that, so I understand. And I mean, I go out and eat and I look at the prices and go, holy smokes! But I know how much it costs. So there's an opportunity here for the government to make a big impact on a very challenged piece of business that would basically probably end up being a net. No difference in net revenue. $12 million instead of the NLC delivering $208 million to the government. It delivers $197, and they leave $12 million in the pockets of small business owners who employ hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. The restaurant industry in Newfoundland employs 10, 12, 14,000 people. It's a huge part of the employment in the tourism and hospitality sector, and is a $1.1 billion industry. And people are struggling, and we are handcuffed by only being able to buy liquor from one place at an inflated cost. And our licensees, the way our licensing works, how our cost of our licenses is like in Alberta, I think you pay $250 a year, no matter what you are or where you are. Here in this province, a fairly busy restaurant is paying, $15, $16, $2,000 a year for their license, and the more alcohol you buy and sell, the more you pay for your license. It goes up, but the busier you are, the more you pay, as opposed to getting some type of volume discount. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for the government to have a really big impact on a sector of the economy in this province without, really taking much flesh out of the government coffers. And I think that it would spread a pile of money around the economy and into the communities in a way that government is not able to do. And I think it will be an easy thing to do. I mean, they came across with the 5% discount at COVID, during COVID, with the stroke of a pen. I mean, there have been people who were, lobbying for this for years, long before I came around. There's been people in the industry, Brenda O'Reilly and others, talking about, the opportunity that there is for this to be a more of a wholesale operation between NLC and licensees. And, it was fought, and well, we can't do it. And then bang, 5% happened almost overnight during COVID. So why couldn't that 5% be 20% or 25% or 30%? Because, that is the reality that we're at now. It's almost impossible to to buy the product at the price that we have to pay for it from the only place that we can get it, and then try to turn it around and provide a reasonable priced option to someone and still make enough money to stay in business.
The restaurant industry, of course, is absolutely teetering. I'd like to see some updated numbers, though. I remember pre-pandemic, there were somewhere in the neighborhood, there was well in excess of 100,000 of these establishments across the country. In March of 2020, restaurant sales were about $4 billion. They were about $6.2 billion in March of 19. So we've seen a drop-off, whether it be on the revenue side and or even the number of establishments. There was also somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.2 or 1.3 million Canadians working in the food service industry. So we're not talking about small potatoes. We're not talking about, just vested interest with you as a business owner. We're talking about the reliance of millions of Canadians on the restaurant business. So it's a bigger conversation than I think the people realize.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think that you and I have talked about and touched on it before. Restaurants are part of your community. It's where you go for your special occasions. It's where you take Nan for her 80th birthday. It's where your kid gets her first job. There's all of that social fabric that's tied up in the industry, and I think that I think what's get lost in calls from fellows like me and others over the last few years is, I'm not calling in and saying, look, we should get a deeper discount from NLC so I can buy a bigger condo in Florida. I'm trying to represent my industry. Like, people are trying to stay open, trying to keep, the 40 jobs they had last year. They're trying to make sure they still got 40 jobs this year. Like, that is what we're talking about. We're talking about survival, not thriving, right? And I think that this is an easy one for government to do because, like I said, you're talking about, restaurants and bars in this city that, that type of a deeper discount from the NLC could mean the difference of 80, 90, an extra $100,000 that stays in that business. And that is a huge number. Goes a long way to being able to stay open for longer hours during January, February, and March and provide a vibrant downtown city scene for restaurants. Because, everybody around the city these days, they're looking at opportunities to close to try and save a buck because we're just getting crushed, with the lack of business in the winter and the cost of doing business in the summer, even when, things are busy. So, there's an opportunity here that I think is really easy to do. Like I said, you look across the country and you can see there's a lot of different ways that it gets handled in different provinces. But, the government of Newfoundland could carve out the small piece of business that is, I don't know the exact number. I've been trying to find out, but, licensee sales represent something between 5 and 7, 8% of the total sales of the NLC. Like, it's a pimple. I was on the phone with you a number of years ago talking about this similar thing. And I believe someone either texted you or something and saying, basically, well, the licensees are such a small part that is kind of inconsequential. I remember that vividly. So it's, everybody says, several people have said, it's a small piece, it's inconsequential, it doesn't matter. Well, if it doesn't matter, then give us a friggin' break. If it's that little, if we're just a rounding error, then you know what? Leaving that money on the table for a small business entrepreneur in Newfoundland and Labrador goes a lot further to making that money have an impact on the business and the communities in Newfoundland and Labrador, rather than throwing an extra $12 or $14 million into general revenue of the province of Newfoundland and Labrador.
Points taken, Todd. I appreciate the time this morning.
Thanks, Patty.
Take care. Bye-bye. There we go, Chef Todd Perrin. Let's take a break. When we come back, Ron, we're probably going to save Ron for after the news because we're going to be nudged up against the news, but he wants to respond to what he just heard from Chef Todd Perrin. Don't go away. Welcome back to the program. Ron, you hang tough so we don't give you short shrift around time before we get to the news. So, in harkening back to the first caller who was talking about that completely bizarre and troubling story regarding 28 bodies in freezer units outside the Health Sciences Centre. And what the conversation is, I guess, multifold, is whether or not it's all simply about the amount of money that the province is able to give folks who need some assistance in finding money for a burial or a cremation. And the number, again, is $2,338. Last year in this province, 360 people availed of that fund, totaling some $990,000. And then, of course, the CPP death benefit at $2,500. But the question is, when we're doing cost comparisons, because it's not simply about dollars and cents, we are talking about human beings, in this case, dead humans. So what's the actual cost of renting or leasing those 4 units versus what might be the cost for establishing a more permanent freezer unit solution at the Health Sciences Centre versus what it would look like to put that money increasing the death benefit? It's a fair question. There is going to be potential, regardless of the amount of money for the death benefit, that there could be overcapacity at the morgue, at the Health Sciences Centre. But if we're going to boil it down to dollars and cents, so maybe it's someone at NL Health Services who's listening this morning can respond and give us an idea exactly what the total is for those 4 rentals, whether we're leasing them or renting them, however we're dealing with them. But because there's got to be an invoice somewhere. So let's get that number and compare to if there's 360 people that avail of that benefit pot this year, if the money was able to increase, say, for instance, to $3,300 or $4,000 when added to the death benefit federally, we probably have money in place now that could cover the cost of a cremation or potentially a burial and a funeral. All right, quick check on the Twitter. We're VOCM Openline. You know what to do. Email address is openline@vocm.com. But our preference is when you join us live on the air. So if you're in the St. John's metro region, 709-273-5211. Elsewhere, toll-free long distance 1-888-590-VOCM, which is 8626. We're taking a break and then we're coming back. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 2. Ron, you're on the air.
Yes, Paddy, good morning, and thanks for putting me up after the news. I don't think I'm going to be that long, though, but I appreciate that. When I just tuned the radio in for the first time when Buddy was on talking about the restaurants, and I didn't know who it was. I said, this guy is very well spoken, and he's telling a good story here. It's a good, this is a good thing, when they talk about getting outside the box and all this stuff and that, right? Ways for government to help businesses instead of just throwing grants around all over the place and throwing out 10 grand here and 5 grand or 100 grand or whatever. So as I was listening to him, and I'm glad you said his name at the end, Todd Perrin. He's not unfamiliar to the news or anything. I just didn't know the voice.
Yeah, Todd Perrin, of course, was with Mallard Cottage for all those years. He's opening up a new establishment somewhere on Water Street. I'm not entirely sure. I probably should have given him the opportunity to tell us what he's up to these days. But yes, he's also been on the board at Hospitality in Newfoundland and Labrador, so he's well versed, obviously, in the industry. He's got lived experience, and he's not afraid to voice his opinion, which we appreciate.
Yes, and he's very, very well spoken. I've seen him on different news and different things before, and very, very well spoken. Represents his trade well. And I'm sure while we're talking now, he's probably going to phone Dave, and you'll be able to plug his business later here. But as he said, it's not about him plugging his business and him making money and him getting the condo. It's about business, and it's about these people who serve you, and you get your tip, they get their tips, and that's a tough life that is to live. I've never done it before. I volunteered on a bar a couple of times, just at hockey stuff or whatever like that, and serving people is not easy, and I think about what he's saying there, and I said, gee whiz, this is, when he said the pricing, like the taxes on it, we all know the taxes on the gas, we all know the taxes on the beer and all this stuff, cigarettes and whatever, but you don't really probably put it the way he said it. Did he say 2 something for a can of cider and then it's 4 something on tax? Is that what he said?
Yeah, I mean, if anyone's ever visited other provinces, you find out very quickly if you go to the LCBO or you go to the Alberta liquor store, we just pay a lot here, and it's all due to taxation, or the vast majority of the increased price is due to taxation anyway.
Yeah, and not trying to be at the detriment of VOCM, but I know when I hear the commercials on for NLC, I'm thinking, I had a drink of lambs the other night. I didn't go to the liquor store to buy the lambs because they said it was $2 off. If I want something at the liquor store, I'm buying it. And I'm thinking, how much money are they sort of wasting? No, VOCM is making money, but how much money are they wasting telling people like Bailey's is $1 off or Lamb's is $2 off at the liquor store, when they could be, NLC could use those dollars in some other way? Now, I know they throw in drink responsibly and all this stuff. It's almost like when you see these betting things on TV, oh yeah, here's how you can bet, but bet responsibly, kind of thing, right?
Yeah. Now, people ask this question all the time about the NLC marketing because they're the only game in town, which is fair. But I think some of those big glossy magazines that they hand out at the liquor store and some of the ads are supported by their actual suppliers. So if I am the rep for Smirnoff or for Lambs or for Iceberg, we pay I'm paying the NLC to advertise like that. So I don't think they're actually wasting marketing money. They're utilizing money from their suppliers because those suppliers want to advertise their wares, whether it's on sale or not.
Well, good point, Paddy. Good point. Because I was thinking NLC, my tax dollars were paying for the advertising. But that's a very legitimate point you're making there. So you just educated me on that part probably a little bit. But anyway, to get on to the meat and bones of what I was going to talk about here was I remember, I'm a little bit older. I don't know if you can tell by the voice or anything, but I can remember going to the Bull and Bear. I don't know if you remember that bar on the go downtown.
I do, yeah.
Okay. So we're going to be singing from the same prayer book here or songbook this morning probably. Is Todd Perrin got a very legitimate point. And if you remember the Bull and Bear, you remember Bear Wars. And there's a generation of young people out there now that never probably seen the Bear Wars downtown before. And for people that don't know what I'm talking about here, I think you might. Bull and Bear, you could have extended hours in bars, but the stipulation, or the caveat, whatever you call it, was that you had to serve food. And at the Bull and Bear, you go down, you pay your $3 or $4 or $5 cover charge after hours. They'd give you a bowl of chili, or a bowl of soup or whatever it was. I think it was chili. And they'd have a great big garbage bucket right next to where you paid your cover charge. So you pay your cover charge, they give you the bowl of chili, you throw it in the bucket, you go and go drink it. That's how they got past that one. That's not a restaurant.
Just to elaborate on the wars that used to be part of the downtown, is I remember a summer where it was like, 49 cents a drink at Club Max. You could pay $20 and go to the Majestic and drink all you want. Now, it made for some pretty sloppy nights downtown for many of their participants. Yeah. But yeah, there was huge competition. It's not like that any longer. I don't really go to the bars. I mean, I haven't been downtown in quite a long time. And it's not necessarily all about price either. It's just not a fun experience most times. There's a lot of looking over your shoulder and whatnot. And look, I have people who are friends of mine that work in the downtown. They own businesses in the downtown, and hopefully they do well. But it's just not the experience that it once was.
No, and for this, like the bowl, you after hours, like, so what Todd Perrin is saying is very legitimate, but if the government sees fit, and I think they should, to try to look at what Todd is saying and come up with a system, but the last thing we need is, like Todd said, it's not about me doing good. It's not about me getting a condo in Florida. It's not about me getting a boat or whatever. But once you open the Pandora's box, and then someone says, hey, I don't serve food here. If I serve food, I can get beer cheaper. Okay, let's buy a couple of microwaves and throw Pop-Tarts in there. We're selling food now. Or let's get that bowl of chili on the go, like years ago, and put a great big garbage bucket next to it. Now we're a restaurant. Yeah,
no, that's not going to pass the smell test any further. But,
you don't know why you can get past the government these days, Paddy, like really, right? But I know, I agree with Todd 100%, but I don't want to see it going the other way.
I appreciate the time. Thanks for the call, Ron.
Okay, Paddy, thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye. And, automatically and predictably, you got some emails saying that, just another business owner that wants more government gravy. The fact of the matter is that there are hundreds or thousands of people employed in the restaurant sector here in this province. Hospitality is a booming industry and it's a growth opportunity. But if we don't have the offerings inside hospitality for tourism and or as a part of your community, businesses are absolutely teetering. I don't think they're making up some of these numbers. We've heard from the Restaurant Association nationally, and some 60%, as Todd mentioned, are reporting that they're just breaking even. And or some people are, actually losing money, especially in some of these really terrible months during the winter where, in the summertime, if you want to go out on a Friday night, you absolutely need a reservation for the vast majority of restaurants in this city. Not so much in the winter. And, of course, then we see restaurants who only open up on certain days during the winter months. And we've seen plenty of them close as well. So if some of that is directly associated with their relationship with the NLC as licensees, then maybe that conversation is something that can be added to. Because if Todd, as he describes, a couple $100 million plus to the government from the NLC annually, and if that was reduced by 10 million or 12 million, and restaurants were able to keep the doors open and keep their employees on the payroll, maybe there's a conversation to be had there versus simply the concept of what people were telling me via email is that just business wanting more money, more profit. I think that might be a slight oversimplification of an industry that is absolutely in a really tough spot here. So if you want to take that on, we can do it. And every time I hear the NLC, of course, I go back to the Green report, and very likely what's inside the pages of the Rothschild report, which we're not allowed to see, is what the future of the NLC actually looks like. We don't even know what government means when they talk about the potential to sell off the NLC. Is that in full? Because we have a relationship with the LCBO, the Liquor Corporation in Ontario, one of the biggest purchasers of liquor in the country. And so how does that relationship move forward? People talk about the upside is that there be more small NLC shops like the Liquor Expresses that are currently in place. And the concept is more competition may see some consequential price wars, maybe better deals to be had. I'm not really sure that's going to come to pass when we talk about the level of taxation on those liquor products in the province. So if you want to take that on, we can do it. And speaking of Rothschild, I assume it'll be sometime this summer when we get some information from the government when Rothschild is evaluating what the value of our equity stake in offshore oil is. Because, again, another recommendation from Green was to divest and to cash out of those equity stakes and what they look like, how much they're worth, because we have an equity stake in 3 of the producing fields. And yes, there's got to be some significant value. In addition to that, we had the province's Auditor General, Denise Hanrahan, on the show last week. She's been trying for years. Her office has been trying for years to get some information and dollars and cents associated with the decommissioning, the end of life of some of these offshore oil fields. Because when you have an equity stake, you don't really have much say. The operator has the vast majority of the say at the table, but when you own a piece of the pie, you also own a piece of the liability, which comes with, at the end of the life, what it's going to cost to decommission these oil fields. The province says they're working towards it. I think that's what Ms. Hanrahan said, but that's also a big part of the conversation when we talk about the potential, say, for Beta Nord. And the government insisting that we're still in the equity business, and they want, I think, 10% of the offshore oil finds out at Beta Nord, which is not just one oil well, it's about 8 at this moment in time. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, great opportunity to have you on the program. Talk about whatever's on your mind. Don't go away. And welcome back to the program. Was asked why no mention of the housing issue and Tent City this morning in the preamble. Well, like I say repeatedly, if there's an issue that you think is of importance to you and to society in general, please do call and put it on the front burner. But of course, we have talked about housing and Tent City quite a lot and will continue to do so. So the issue now, of course, when we see the winter storms that come, and apparently there was lots of volunteers down there bringing food and blankets and clothes and propane, but there still remains some dozen or more people living in the tents behind the Colonial Building. Some of the questions that sometimes come across in a snarky fashion is, if they've been offered shelter, whether it be in an emergency shelter or a hotel room or maybe the Comfort Inn, how come they remain in tents? Are they choosing to do it simply for the optics and the politics of it? I don't know. But, it does speak volumes about the state of some of these emergency shelters. People would be willing or wanting to stay in a tent versus in out of the elements in a potentially dangerous situation. So that's one part of it. But what is being offered? That's something that remains unclear. When the new Minister of Housing says, and that's Fred Hutton, he says that when he was there, they were repeatedly offered options. But what were those options? Were they just inside the world of emergency shelters? And what's also confusing on that front is the province is just now working on putting some regulations for oversight and monitoring and enforcement at emergency shelters, because people do report some really terrible circumstances and conditions in some of these shelters, and they're not all created equal. But if you look at the amount of money the province pays to operate emergency shelters, a refocused money idea is probably overdue and pragmatic. So that's one moving part. And I don't know about every individual why they chose not to accept the offer. We're still trying to find out more information about exactly what's going on at the Comfort Inn. There has been lots of consternation regarding the province's decision to lease the facility for 3 years at a cost of about $7 million per year, as opposed to purchasing, which has happened in other parts of the country. But importantly, inside those 140 rooms, vastly different, we hope, than an emergency shelter, because you get your own room with a locked door and your own key, which speaks to the security-related matters in other shelters. But apparently there's people there. So it was closed until the beginning of this month to prepare for being operated as a transitional facility, housing facility versus a hotel. But who's there? How did they get there? How many people are there? what's the eligibility or the vetting criteria? We don't really know any of these things, which is pretty important information that has been kind of left out of the public discourse. Even the fundamental question of how many people are there, which we asked Minister Osborne last week. He did not have that number, saying that it's not necessarily in his department's authority or jurisdiction. But with the wraparound services would absolutely be part of it, because if you're a social worker or a doctor, or you're dealing with mental health and addictions and or physical health, and those supports are, we're told, will be at the Comfort Inn, then maybe, just maybe, we can get that number. And remember, it was all about the criteria. It wouldn't be just throw the doors open, anyone can get in there, but we don't know what that criteria ended up being. So still lots of big unknowns regarding it, and it's hard to know without answers to those questions whether or not it's a good idea, a bad idea, it's destined to work, destined to fail. So we'll continue to try to get those pieces of info, and we have been talking about, like we brought up last week, a report that has come from what they call a task force on housing and climate. There's a ton of recommendations, and I read through it, and there's a lot there. There's recommendations for the federal government, for the provincial governments, and for municipalities, but 4 key takeaways. They were talking about legalized density, focusing housing growth in cities and communities where there's existing infrastructure like roads and water lines. It's faster, less costly, lower carbon, and more resilient. Number 2, implement better building codes. Better building can reduce operating costs, cut emissions, and improve resilience. Invest in factory-built housing, which is just flabbergasted that this hasn't been a more of a go-to issue, because there's lots of factory-built housing that can be utilized very quickly and very timely versus what it takes to actually build a home in the traditional sense. So they say invest in factory-built housing. Factory-built housing and other processes and material innovations can speed up construction, reduce costs, and systematize energy-efficient and climate-resilient features. Don't build in high-risk areas, and we know that that's going to be a key focus right around the country. The most expensive home is the one you need to rebuild, and after an extreme weather event, so says one of the key takeaways from that task force. Let's get to line number 1. Good morning, Paul. You're on the air.
Hi, good morning, Paddy.
Good morning to you.
I was listening to the news there a couple of weeks ago on CBC. They were talking about, I thought it was kind of interesting, in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, Paddy, apparently they're having a big problem with poaching baby eels. Apparently there's over 300 lakes in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, and they have you can imagine, Paddy, 300 lakes trying to catch poachers in 300 lakes. But apparently the big problem there is, Paddy, apparently from what they're saying, Paddy, a 5-kilogram tub of baby eels is worth thousands of dollars.
Yeah, big market in Asia, apparently.
Yes, sir. Yeah, apparently they have to keep them alive too. And when they get to the other side, apparently they give them growth hormones to make them bigger. But this is what they were saying. They were saying that it's so bad in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick now that the federal fisheries minister was thinking about actually shutting down the baby eel fishery because things were getting violent there. People were being threatened. And I thought that was kind of interesting. Pete, I got to ask you, in Newfoundland, you don't hear much about like eels or baby eels. Is that not even a fishery here at all?
Not so far as a commercial one, as far as I know. I can't be definitive on that. The only eel-related story pops to mind here in this province was when there was a fishing derby out in Dildo, and Buddy caught the biggest one, but it was an eel, and they disqualified him. So that's the only eel story I've got in my head here. But I did hear that story come from Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, and they were talking about the lucrative market in Asia. But then Canadian Border Services said they looked and they couldn't find any evidence of black market shipments, which doesn't really pass the smell test. They were being poached for a reason.
Why? Well, apparently they compared it to a 5-kilogram tub of peanut butter. Take the peanut butter out of that, put the baby eels in it. It's worth about $4,000 or $5,000.
Amazing.
Can you imagine? Yeah. And have you ever caught an eel on your fishing line, Paddy?
Once ever. Yeah.
I did, but I had literally grabbed the fishing rod. I was only a young fella, Paddy, years ago. Well, it's been in the 70s, and I had to grab that rod with 2 hands and just yank that thing in hard as I could, Paddy, to get it in onto the land. And then, of course, Dad came over and took it off the I didn't know what the heck it was, Paddy. But
I knew what it was, and I cut the line. I never even touched it.
Have you ever ate eel, Paddy?
No, I haven't.
You haven't gone that far, have you?
No, sir, I have not. They kind of gross me out. I remember catching that eel that day, and when I saw what it was, I simply cut the line. I gave up me Red Devil.
Yeah, that was my first and only experience, but I'm sure other listeners will probably have a lot more to say about that. But Patty, how did he ever get into the lakes anyway? Like, I often wondered that, like, into the provinces themselves. I mean, they're not brought in, right? They're just naturally there, I guess?
Yeah. They are. And apparently David Williams tells me that someone called from possibly New Harbour says there is a commercial eel fishery there in particular. So I didn't know that, but fair enough. Yeah,
apparently they just go out with the nets on the rivers or something and get them that way. But I just thought it was a fascinating topic, and I didn't know much about it in Newfoundland. But anyway, that's my little take for this morning. I
appreciate the time. It's a strange story. And I mean, I think,
isn't it, eh?
I think those eels are called glass eels. Is that right?
I'm not sure, my boy.
Because I've seen the picture. They look like the small strands of glass.
There's a big demand for me, boy. The poaching on salmon and everything anyway. But apparently it's gotten to the point now where the federal fisheries minister has threatened to cancel the season, which is bad for the legal people. But I don't know if she's gone so far and done that yet. This is 2 weeks ago. But apparently it's coming up to the time now, so they may have canceled it. I don't know. But that'd be too bad if it did for the people who are doing it legally to help support their families,
Yeah, someone just zipped me over a very quick link. I just opened it and very quick scroll. The May 2023 fisheries offer sees $500,000 worth of baby eels outside Halifax. The fishery is worth $47 million in 2022, shared between 8 commercial license holders and some Indigenous communities. Goes on to say that, here's an interesting quote. The fact that Canada Border Services has not managed to intercept a single shipment of the 4.5 metric tons that DFO acknowledges was harvested illegally in 2023, the actual number being much higher, suggests DFO has not done an adequate job educating CBS, that's Canadian Border Services, or passing along tips from the public. So there's something going on.
Yeah, this seems awful strange. How are they getting them out? I mean, they're getting them out somehow.
Well, a 2017 investigation led to the raid of a warehouse near Pearson Airport in Toronto, where police seized about 8 kilograms of what they thought were eels worth $170,000, harvested from a First Nations food, social, and ceremonial fishery. Such catches are prohibited from being sold. There you go. So there was that one seizure in 2017, but it's an ongoing concern. I'm going to read a bit more about this now that you've got me intrigued.
Wow. Yeah, I was fascinated by it, and I just wondered about Newfoundland, what happens here, but apparently you said you got the text or something. It is a fishery here in the province. So
apparently so, yeah.
Yeah, very good. Well, thanks, Patty, for your time, my friend.
I appreciate yours. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks,
bye-bye. That's an interesting one. I love when we go off the beaten path a little bit with those types of stories, but I did hear that story and didn't give it a whole lot of mind or attention, but now that you brought it back up, I'm going to see if I can find out some more info. Okay. Let's go ahead and take a break. When we come back, air ambulance. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 2. Dave, you're on the air.
Good morning, Patty. How are you?
Doing okay, thank you. How about you?
Interesting topic there just before on the Elvers, the glass eels.
Yeah.
Very a topic that touches my heart as well because of the small allocation of actual quota that you see for the province versus Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. And as far as I know, the black market hasn't touched the Newfoundland market at all. And why they don't open up an opportunity for at least an increased fishery, I have no idea. I've tried to, but never got anywhere with that. But anyway, that's probably a topic for another day. The reason I called today, of course, is to see if they're still going ahead. And from what I understand, they are accepting proposals now for air ambulance to be operated out of places like St. John's, which is unofficially the desired location that they're looking to place air ambulance within the province. Well, I guess it's only my opinion, but I base my opinion on a observation of fact, and I would think that it never ever made sense to begin something at the destination. I really don't get the point. I mean, the East Coast being the best healthcare that we have in the province, most anybody living elsewhere on the island and in Labrador are most often availing of air ambulance services to get to the East Coast. So that being said, like the East Coast would not be put out by not having the service, I guess, to initiate there and to be based there. Then it comes down to two things, which all too often happens in government. I hope there are MHAs listening out there now. I hope the Premier's listening. I hope the Minister of Health's listening. Or somebody from your departments. Because the rest of us in Newfoundland, looking at this even being on the table to take place, that it's even a possibility, makes us go to two. It immediately makes your mindset revert to two areas. One, first of all, that there's nobody involved in seeing out to this service that has any common sense whatsoever, or you're a bunch of liars. And it can't be one or the other, because common sense says that, naturally every area can't have air ambulance. So centralizing it and having it basically performed in the fashion that many years trying to have this service in Newfoundland has taught us, from the use of everything from gravel runways to asphalt runways, where these things can land and what they can do and how they can be integrated with ground ambulance, were never ever meant and are not perpetuated for usage primarily, I guess, for the East Coast, which arguably most everything that would happen in the outlying of St. John's area, shall we say, would be by road, ground ambulance. The only way that this makes sense to relocate it, and I've heard some really flimsy excuses because I have done some homework on this, such as, well, nobody wants to work in Gander to be the personnel for this service. Nobody wants to work in Goose Bay to be the personnel for this service. They want to live in the city or whatever. Okay, well, first of all, before you deal with that at the employee level, whoever's responsible for staffing these jobs, for seeing continuity in this service so that it's effective and good for all of us, well, first off, fire that person, get rid of them. Anybody who feels that, it's impossible because of the remote locations, like, say in Goose Bay or Gander is not as attractive a place for personnel to live as St. John's, well, anybody that's in the system that works as a flying medic or whatever the case may be, fire them. And get yourself people. I mean, they staff these jobs in very remote locations worldwide, everywhere from Nunavut to the Arctic Sea, where they have places that transfer and move patients by air, and there are staff there.
Yeah, I don't think it's as simple as saying, well, we'll just fire you, because I would imagine there's some union protections also associated with many of these types of jobs. But I do think you're right that it's a little bit flimsy. But that being said, there's already issues with staffing healthcare professionals in certain parts of the country, in certain parts of the province, because of the remote nature. So that's not going away. And we can prove that to be true because there's been additional incentives offered for working in some of these areas. So it might be flimsy, but there might be a dollop of truth to it at the same time. You know what's also interesting about air ambulance, and I think this is the case, and if I'm wrong, someone correct me, is air ambulance is not even managed by the Department of Health. It's managed by the Department of Transportation, when it's absolutely a healthcare service. It's such a strange home for it to be in transportation versus healthcare.
It is, and it's rather strange that these problems come about all of a sudden, because I really would not consider Gander to be a remote area at all, or anywhere that's an isolated area. And the same for Goose Bay. Goose Bay is a beautiful community, and lots of everything there. I'm sure that there's lots of young people, and from what I understand, you don't have to be like a full-fledged RN or whatever the case may be to take on these jobs as the medics or whatever that fly aboard of air ambulance. In the cases where it's required, they make provision to have somebody of higher level of experience, and like I say, if there's a machine there that has to be operated and they're familiar with it or whatever. But in terms of logistics, I would think that the RFP that's been written to suggest to anybody that it's possible to do this elsewise other than where we would consider it to be most efficient And some of the things that we've heard about the possible hangar space that's now going to be made available on the East Coast and those attached to it and certain medical services that help to provide that, there may be decisions other than ones that they can use as their immediate go-to, like staffing remote areas and this type of thing, which arguably, I guess, could be, as you said, a dollop of some certainty to that fact or to that statement. Well, we expect you to do better. If you got to come up with the right incentives to staff these areas and it costs a little more, then do it.
Yeah, and in addition, even at the beginning of this conversation, now we know come June 1st, the ambulance integration is apparently going to be in place. We don't know about whether or not the government, and I asked Minister Osborne this direct question last week as well, about whether or not the government is going to recognize seniority, because that's going to be tricky. Apparently the unions are negotiating that facet. And then when we talk about air ambulance and going out for someone to design, to build, to operate and maintain air ambulance service there, as they say that they were informed or they were told that the province should not get involved in owning, operating fixed wing and helicopters for air ambulance. But based on what? Like, it's one thing to say you were advised, but the person who advised you must have come with some rationale behind it. So what would make the government operating the air ambulance any different than the private sector? Is the only difference profit? Or is there some built-in issue, reality, where the province was told they shouldn't be investing in that front? I never really understood that, to be honest.
Well, I think arguably there would be strengths to both sides of that equation. Like, say, as far as staffing is concerned, probably they could help there. But, I mean, the actual running of aircraft and whatever, a few years back, they replaced one of the air ambulances to the tune of around, I think it was about $7 million, so there could be more effective air transportation out of Labrador. And they got a great plane, but they're having trouble staffing it. Well, these are not impossible anomalies to get around. What I do believe is that without the proper effort, they somewhat appear impossible, and also lends itself to some credibility with changing the way things have been ran or doing it somebody else's way. It makes no sense to start this service at the destination point, and the time that would be lost, the delays that are involved in all of that makes no sense. They're talking about putting it in there, and even if it doesn't operate or whatever, and I mean, there's going to be lots of days that's going to happen. St. John's has got the worst weather condition for no-fly days anywhere on the island.
It does. It's terrible here.
I know people that have been waiting for air ambulance transfer for vital heart and other issues that are related to necessary, it has to be air ambulance, waiting in hospital, and have been waiting for weeks for the ability to avail of this service. Many of times being told, well, the thing can't fly today due to fog or whatever reason, and it could probably get out, but we're not sure about getting back in. And what? Look, that in itself should rule out the East Coast. Fact of the matter is, even if you operated from Gander, and the worst case scenario that you had to use road ambulance from Gander to St. John's, that's almost always attainable and doable, only in the very worst of weather condition, and that's not something we deal with every day. So I honestly believe that it's most sensible to be centralized, to be also located in Labrador, and then we'll bring them to St. John's, not start from St. John's to come pick us up. You don't start your paper route at the end of the paper route, right?
I appreciate the time, Dave. Thanks for this.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
And I'd like to hear from ministers and especially MHAs around Newfoundland, especially MHAs, because you've been so grossly quiet on this issue, it's not fit. But everybody in your region, if you're not living in St. John's and you're off the Avalon, well, MHAs, wake up, will you?
Thanks for the call, Dave.
Thanks, buddy.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Take care.
All right, let's take a quick break here. When we come back, we're looking forward to speak with you. The topic, well, that's up to you. Don't go away. Welcome back to the program. Well, I was asked to share this tidbit of information, and it might be very helpful because you know full well there's plenty of people out there that have tons of questions about the National Dental Care Plan. So this month they open up the portal for those 70 plus. So if you are someone who's eligible for the dental plan and you have some looming questions and you are in and around town, coming up tomorrow, Tuesday, March the 12th, from 2 to 4 p.m. at the Legion, Branch 56, down on the Boulevard in Pleasantville, you can indeed get some of your questions questions answered. Mary Sherrill, who's the president of the NDP, and I believe she's going to be a candidate in the upcoming, whenever that might be, general election representing the NDP in St. John's East. She's also going to be joined by NDP health critic Dan Davies to answer your questions, of which there are many. So that's tomorrow afternoon, 2 to 4 at the Legion on the Boulevard in Pleasantville. And here's somewhere the confusion lies. So remember, if you have private insurance, you are not eligible for this. And of course, then there's a net household income. At this point, it's $90,000 or less, you're eligible. If you earn $70,000 or less as a net household income, there's no co-pays. But if you have any form of private insurance, and get this one, this is really quite confusing. I have private insurance, but I did not check the box to provide dental coverage insurance. So I'm not getting any dental coverage, period. But even if I have a plan like that, I'm not eligible. Even though I don't have dental insurance, but because I'm on some sort of insurance plan that's an option as an add-on, I'm not eligible. Plus, there's some clarification has been offered by Health Canada about this act. So let's see if I can find the specifics. A spokesperson for Health Canada told the news that when people who purchase private dental insurance plans on their own will qualify for the national program, but only after the existing private policies are no longer in effect. Ottawa has added an exemption for retirees who decided not to sign up for private dental insurance offered specifically through their pension plans. If they opted out of those pension dental plans before the 11th of December of last year and aren't allowed to opt back in, they qualify for the national program. Talk about confusing. So, giving me a date of December 11th last year, and unbeknownst to Canadians, that was a requirement for your eligibility. If you weren't told prior to December 11th, how could you have possibly understood that that's what you needed to do to be eligible for the national program? I mean, seriously. When there's massive big policy shifts like this, and two of the biggest enhancements in healthcare in this country since the adaptation of universal healthcare has been the pharmacare plan, which is staggered and laddered, and the Canada Dental Care Plan. But it's fine to tell me that I'm now eligible if I knew something on the 10th of December, because who knew? Nobody knew. So, again, this is supposed to be starting to be offered in May for those who are eligible. It started off, of course, remember, with people who are 78 and older, and that's going to roll out. And by the end of the year, everyone who's eligible, all those age groups will be covered. So, again, the confusion reigns supreme. And even in the national pharmacare, it's not all-encompassing at this moment in time. About $1.5 billion to cover diabetes medication. Or one more comment on the dental plan before we get to pharmacare. We don't even know how many dentists, hygienists, or dentures are even going to sign up to participate in this plan. So, again, it's fine to have all these wide, sweeping, broad expansions of healthcare, but when we don't even know who's going to participate, and technically who's actually eligible, then what? And inside of pharmacare. So $1.5 billion, and of course covering diabetes medication and contraceptives. On the diabetes front, how does that work with provincial plans? You know, for instance, glucose monitoring. If there's certain medications covered in part or in full provincially, how does this national plan dovetail with these plans? Some provinces are even talking about they're not interested. They're saying if this is going to enhance coverage, whatever dollar savings that could be achieved, like Alberta, Quebec, they say they're not interested. They want the money. They say they'll expand their own programs, reduce the bureaucracy, but of course that has a massive impact on what is one of the concepts that has been discovered every single time since this has been researched from the 60s to the most recent report done by Dr. Eric Hoskins, is bulk buy is one of the places where we'll find the savings. So opting out jeopardizes some of the potential upside of that bulk buy. Anyway, if you want to go to that information session on the dental program, it's tomorrow afternoon from 2 to 4 down at the Legion on the Boulevard in Pleasantville. Let's go to line number 1. Doc, you're on the air.
Morning, Paddy. How are you?
Not too bad, thanks. How about you?
Good, good. You're all shoveled out, I hope?
I am all shoveled out, and there was a lot of it.
I know. My daughters were, one in particular was away, and her husband was away, and one on business and the other on a basketball tournament for the kids. And they were all delayed, of course, with the snow, and yours truly and my wife were left to do the babysitting, or kind of semi-adult sitting, right, with teenagers. And Anyhow, it was a good 4 or 5 days. What it started off to be 2, and it ended up being 4 or 5 because of air travel, hey?
Yeah, and look, we're just lucky that unlike Snowmageddon, we're lucky we had those few warm days which saw some snow melt, because that's the big difference. Like Kilbride, they got 90 centimetres, very much what Snowmageddon was like, except we already had 100 centimetres on the ground when Snowmageddon hit us, and it was much colder, so that's why it's not quite as drastic an outcome this go around, but there's still a ton of snow. Boy, oh boy.
Oh, is there ever? Teddy, just a few issues I wanted to remind people of. The incoming tax increases. As you indicated, I think one day last week, the carbon tax on April the 1st is going to go up 23%. You're talking in the vicinity of 20 cents a litre. And, that's going to have
17.
A massive increase in the cost of living, and then on top of that, of course, with the cost of living, I kind of figured the Bank of Canada would lower the rate a little bit and give people a break, particularly renewing their mortgages and so on, but that didn't happen, and so on and on goes the impact on the cost of living.
Well, the carbon tax implication on the 1st of April will mean the carbon tax on a litre of gasoline is 17 cents.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And nobody seems to listen. You see, on top of that, by the way, the air traveller security charge on the 1st of May is going up 33%.
It's
so
got $7. It's going to be $7
Yeah.
domestically, right?
Yeah, and a little more if you're going internationally.
Yeah, $12, I think.
Yeah. So, I mean, it all impacts, in particular if you have families taking vacations and things like that. And it just seems like there's nobody listening. Recently I had a conversation with a Liberal MP, and I brought the issue up about all of this taxation, the carbon tax, the revolt that's taking place right across Canada. We saw evidence of it in Durham, Ontario last week, the by-election.
Saw evidence of what?
Evidence renewing the authenticity of the polls that show the Conservative Party in Canada having a massive lead over Liberal and NDP parties. So the by-election in Durham elected a PC in Ontario.
Didn't elect the PC, elected a Conservative, though, yeah.
Conservative, yeah, you're right.
But, I mean, I know people will make that point, but, I mean, being realistic, the Durham has been held by the Conservatives for over 20 years. Virtually nobody voted. It was ridiculously low voter turnout. So a party that held the seat that they've long held for a couple of decades, I'm not sure that's the bellwether that, has direct relationship with the national polls, to be honest.
Well, the leading polling outfits are saying that what is particularly interesting about that victory is the increase was something like 10% more than the leader of the Conservative Party, the former Aaron O'Toole, had in all his years representing the district. So not only did they win, but they won over and above any other win they've had there, in particular when Aaron O'Toole was there, and he was very, very popular. So
was he?
Pollsters are saying that this is indicative of what's happening across Canada based on their polling. So, let me get back for a second to my conversation with the Liberal MP, and I talked about the fact, doesn't the party seem to realise that they're sinking like lead in the polls? And he said, yeah, and in reference to the carbon tax and everything else. And his words to me were, the ship has sailed, and there's now a momentum there that is likely going to result in a Conservative government in the next federal election. And I said, well, you think maybe a year or so in the future before we have that election, and you think now the caucus would try and turn the ship around. And he said to me, Dennis, boy, they realise what's happening, they being fellow MPs, Liberal MPs, they realise what's happening, but they think between now and then they can take corrective action. So I would suggest that if Trudeau wanted to take corrective action, he might start on April the 1st with the carbon tax, because Well, it's heavy enough. It's going to get heavier, and people are if people are upset in this country right now about anything, and they are about quite a few things, carbon tax heads the list.
Yeah, even though I'm not 100% sure we've had a really, what I would suggest, and I'm not talking about me and you, but I'm talking on the national scale, I'm not sure we've had a really honest conversation about carbon tax, to be honest with you, whether it's its relationship with inflation and or food, and the fact that, it's not that long ago, and I know you know this to be true, is that a conservative policy was generally created based on market pressures, right? Forever and a day, that's been one of the linchpins of conservatism, is, that price and the market will drive all of the issues and offer most of the solutions. And it's not that long ago that the former Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, was in favor of a carbon tax. So now that it's been imposed by the Liberals, it's the dumbest thing of all time, which is sort of, where I think what I mean by maybe not the most honest, fulsome, factual conversation regarding tax, because political sloganeering is effective. As much as it's not the greatest piece of actual policy creation, but when someone says, I'm going to cut a tax, people like that. People like to pay less tax. They just absolutely do. So whether, and the Liberals have tried fruitlessly to try to change some of the words around it so that it's a fee, not a tax, because when people hear tax, people don't like tax. By and large, people don't like tax, and people don't like paying tax. And when someone says they're going to reduce your taxes, they go, I like that. Right? So
yeah, and the thing too is people are really confused because the information coming out, in particular on the carbon tax. I mean, you have Minister O'Regan saying, with the rebate you're going to get back more than you paid in. Others are saying the same thing, like we're taking this money from you, but we're going to give it back later on. And more so.
Well, for some Canadians, that's absolutely true.
The Parliamentary Budget Office is saying, no, that's not the case. You're not getting back. No matter how much you get on the rebate, you're not getting back what the carbon tax is costing you in your daily life, be it the cost of living, groceries, gasoline. The only thing they gave us a little bit of a break on was furnace oil. And that's caused massive political problems.
Yeah, well, again, it depends on who you ask, I would imagine. It's caused problems for people that are living out west, that's for sure. And that, look, I will agree, that's counterintuitive. It doesn't, I'm happy enough because I heat my home with oil, so I'm happy enough not to pay a carbon tax on heating my own home. I think there's a debate to be had as to whether or not I should have to pay tax on the necessity of life to begin with. And when we talk about the cleaner of all the sources of home heating fuel in this country, natural gas much cleaner than what I use, but they didn't cut it on that. They cut it on the dirty one. So it just kind of doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But anyway, the PBO did absolutely say that many people in the country get back more than they pay in carbon tax related usage, but that's basically just low and a portion of the middle incomers. The rest of us know.
Yeah, I mean, and you got to calculate the reality of that, and the cost that diesel and all the things that affect, let's say, Newfoundland, Labrador, and other Canadians in terms of the cost of their food, the cost of buying things. I mean, in this province, everything that comes in, when the cost of fuel goes up, it's reflected in our daily living, whether you go to the supermarket, the Avalon Mall, or the Millbrook Mall out in Corner Brook. You're going to pay a little bit more because it costs more to get the goods and products here in Newfoundland and Labrador. Simple as that. So you'll never get a full accounting. So, if I was the PMO, and I guess all this stuff, you ever wonder where all these ideas are generated? Well, to some degree they come through the caucus, but basically the power there is the Prime Minister's office or the Premier's office here in Newfoundland, Labrador. So you wonder how these things get created and then they get done, and then you have to reverse it because of the public impact, which is good. I mean, it comes down to the public being aware of everything that's happening and standing up and being counted and contacting their MPs, do everything you can in the case of the carbon tax to prevent it from going up on April the 1st.
Very quickly before...
You're going to get a shock when you go to the pump.
Very quickly before I absolutely have to get to the news. So, I mean, this is not attaching labels for the sake of, but obviously not supportive of the Trudeau Liberals and maybe not of the Fury Liberals, but obviously on the National Front, a Conservative supporter. Does that mean you are also a full-throated supporter of Mr. Poilievre and his policies?
I don't agree, Paddy, with all of the things that a mayor may do, and I was a mayor at one point in time, and I'm sure there are people who agreed with some of the things that occurred while I was mayor, other people who didn't, and that goes for a premier or a prime minister. But I think Pierre Poilievre would be good for Newfoundland and Labrador. I think his policies are positive for Newfoundland and Labrador. Do I agree with every single thing that he stands for? No. I never agreed necessarily with everything every leader stood for. I mean, life is not...
Well, that's because there is no one politician and or party that has all the answers. And whoever believes that has simply got their head in the sand. Nobody is like that. No party or individual has all the best ideas, all the right ideas, all the answers. And those who pretend they do, they are pulling the wool over your eyes politically. And it's nothing but a pander. Doc, I got to get to the news, but I appreciate the time.
All right, buddy. Take care of yourself.
You too. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
All right, let's take a break for the news. When we come back, we're speaking with you. Don't go away.
You're listening to a rebroadcast of VOCM Open Line. Have your say by calling 709-273-5211 or 1-888-590-8626 and listen live weekday mornings at 9 a.m.
Welcome back to the show. So inside the whole world of the housing conversation and rent, you know, notably when you look at jurisdictions in North America that have built at a feverish pace, it has a direct implication with rental cost. I know it's not absolutely a straight line between here and, say, for instance, Austin, Texas, but they went on a building spree. And in 12 months, rent came down 7%. So there's not just about the housing conversation and the interest rate at the Bank of Canada, what have you. Rental issue is still massive. Average rent in the country now has eclipsed $2,000, which is remarkable. And it once was Vancouver had the highest rent in the country. Now it's in Calgary. So here's an interesting one. Now, during the pandemic, thankfully, we did not have this the problems like we had in long-term care facilities or what people refer to as nursing homes up along, because we have very, very few privately owned. And not to say that the privately owned is a problem, but in Quebec and Ontario, they did a horrible job. And we saw COVID rampant inside those facilities and causing numerous deaths. And here's what's part of the potential rental solution. Is retirement homes. Rental vacancy rate around the country is on the average about 1.5%. So even in this neck of the woods, it has gone from where it was about pre-pandemic, about 8-9% vacancy rate, now down to less than 2%. But they're talking about vacancy rates inside retirement homes and the possibility for these owners and operators to rent to folks who are not seniors, to rent to young people. So here's a couple of numbers for consideration. Chartwell, the largest operator of retirement homes in Canada, said in a press release its forecasted February 2024 vacancy rate was around 15%. They're having a hard time convincing people to come back into these homes based on what we saw during the pandemic. So that's a pretty curious potential solution to add into the rental conversation, because as much as people will bemoan the fact there's still folks living in tents and bemoan the fact that, you know, it takes a long time between identifying a possibility, a piece of land, and or a reno or a tear down and a rebuild, it just takes way too long. So inside that world of retirement homes, and that might not be directly applicable to this province, but it certainly is part of the conversation in the country. And these are not people making up the numbers. These are the companies themselves putting out their updated vacancy rates and what it might mean to add into the rental market, what it might mean not only for access, but for the price per month. So that's a pretty fascinating part of the conversation if you want to entertain it, because I think that's quite an interesting story. Then they go on to talk about the rebirth now, at more and more people living in intergenerational housing. Nan and Pop living there, because it's not that long ago that was a pretty common feature, and then it went by the wayside in large part, but now apparently it's right back as part of an active trend across the country. Let's keep going. Let's go to line number 2. Ed, you're on the air.
Yeah. Hello, Patty.
Hi there.
My name is Ed Pinn. I'm down across from you here on Kenmount Road.
Yep.
I'm in the same boat as I'm in as I was in last week, and I got more snow now than ever. Is there any way you can possibly get someone to help me out here?
Well, last time we were really quite pleased. I can't remember off the top of my head who came to your rescue.
His guy's name was John with Party, and
John and Party. Yep.
Yeah, and he's up to his ears, but I found two more people, and they're in the same boat. So again, today I got more snow than ever.
Yes, I can empathize, having gone through it this past weekend. So you'll be able to see the house that is completely snowed in right here on Kenmount Road, very close by our studios. So if you're in and around and you got a plow got a blade on the front of your truck, and you might be able to help Ed out, consider doing exactly that.
Paddy, you can't see my house. You're true. Hopefully someone will help me out. I've been here now 3 days, and it's not a good feeling.
No, of course not. So whether apparently parties are too busy, and they were really quite helpful the last time around. So if you're around Kenmount Road today and you notice that there's a house that you can barely see from the road because of the snow, if you can drop a blade, give Ed a bit of a hand, we'd really appreciate it. And hopefully, Ed, let us know if you get any if you have any luck.
Okay, Patty, I appreciate that, and thank you so much. Please help me, boys. Thank you.
Good luck, Ed.
Good luck. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Yeah, and of course, over the weekend, I kind of check out come 12 o'clock on Friday. I do not check my work email over the weekend. Just can't. There's just too much to it. And it does cause me to play a lot of catch-up on Monday and Tuesday. So if there's an email that you sent that you need me to see or want me to see right away, please resend it, because I did come into, there was hundreds anyway, over the course of the weekend. A lot of them, subject line was about snow and what have you, so lots of complaints about people's roads not being done well after the storm had subsided on Saturday afternoon, what have you. So if there's something you need me to see, just please take the opportunity today to resend it so I can put it back at the top of my email inbox. Let's take a break. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. So I'm getting plenty of questions regarding what's going on with the RNC in Lab West. So people have posted some vague references to what has happened overnight up in that part of the province regarding that law enforcement agency. They're all rumors at this point, and some of them are really of quite a serious nature, and so consequently, until there's some actual confirmation, I'm going to hesitate in floating or ginning up the rumor mill, because I'm pretty sure I know what has gone on up there regarding a member of the RNC, but until that actually gets confirmed, probably just going to hold off, because it is a very dramatic rumor that's flying around and potentially tragic. So that's the best I can do on this front. So unless someone really tells me via confirmation from the RNC, probably just going to leave it alone for now. So also hearing from people over the weekend and today who were customers that had booked passage on Lynx. And Lynx was the low-cost airline that ceased operations on the 26th of February. And their concern is getting compensation on two fronts. One, they need a refund. Two, they actually had some air travel interrupted and were due compensation, but I guess we'll pick them apart one by one. If you were due compensation and you were flying on Lynx because of an interruption in air travel, you're not getting the money. That's the unfortunate reality. They're not going to pay you. Right? Even if you file a complaint with the Canadian Transportation Agency, of which they are dealing with tens of thousands of these complaints, there is no money coming. Lynx has also gone on to say they're not going to refund any of the airline tickets. They pointed you to your bank, your credit card company. Now, the problem with some has been when contact your bank or the credit card company, they will say, no, go to Lynx. After time and effort and frustration, people apparently are having some success with their credit card company to get the rebate, but that's going to be the only course of action there, because Lynx is not going to pay the refund, and if you were due compensation because of an interruption, that's gone. You're not going to get the money. even when people had to scramble after we found out at the 11th hour that Lynx was ceasing operations, it then comes at an enormous cost to rebook passage. You know, there was one example where a lady had booked a round trip to Montreal, going to cost her, she says in the news, some $250. Now, when rebooking with one of the big airlines, in this case is Air Canada, is $750. So people thought they were in for quite the bargain travel, and then consequently, with the Lynx going by the wayside, then not so much. You're right back into the unaffordable envelope that we all unfortunately deal with far too often. So those three areas, you had to pay more to rebook your passage. You're not getting compensation based on air travel protections, and you're going to have to scramble with your credit card company or your bank, because that's the only place you're going to be able to get a refund. Let's go to line number 2. Say good morning to the the president of the Newfoundland Trailways. That's Rick Noseworthy. Rick, you're on the air.
Good morning, Paddy. How are you?
Great, sir. How about you?
Doing good, boy. Doing good. Just wanted to touch base. We're getting a lot of calls, of course, now when we're getting snow on the trailway. And, of course, we're not the Snowmobile Federation, but we work with them very closely, and, you know, we appreciate everything we do with them. But one of the questions that we get asked, the Trailway Council, are ATVs permitted on the trailway in the wintertime when there's snow and grooming operations? And I just wanted to clarify, the answer is yes. ATVs are allowed on it. An ATV with a track is also allowed on it. You know, that's one of these ATVs where they take off the tires and put the big tracks on it.
Yeah.
That's also permitted on the trailway 12 months of the year. And a permit is not required. But what we would ask is, if somebody like the Snowmobile Federation, who does a phenomenal job, if they got the trail groomed, out of respect for the groomers and the people that are using our snowmobiles, it's a good time for the ATVs, be it tracked or on track, to stay off until it sets up. Because, you know, even though permitted allowed on it, tearing it up after somebody has put so much work into it and ruining it for everybody else, just pure respect, stay away from it.
How can people evaluate whether or not it's set enough so that the ATV tires aren't going to rip it apart?
I think once you start moving on it, you probably know. If you're sinking into it, that's a good sign.
So it's as simple as that?
Yeah, I would say it's as simple as that. And, you know, it's a bit tangly. It's a provincial park. You know, the Trailway is provincial park, so it's for everybody to use. And, you know, just respect other users on it. It's as simple as that. And, you know, we're hearing stories that, I'm allowed on it. And you are, but once again, show a bit of respect for the hard work that people are putting in.
Do I remember correctly, there was a fellow who was doing a lot of the grooming in one section of the trail that was, so to speak, retiring?
Throughout, we're always hearing those stories. Either someone's doing a bit of grooming, you know, or cleaning up with their own backhoe and little stuff like that. And from a trailway perspective, you know, we don't own the trail. It's a provincial park. But from a liability perspective, those people, you know, need to be careful. Like, we would love to see people out there, but, you know, that trail is held to a higher standard. It has to be maintained consistently. And, you know, even things like when you're grading it on your own, you know, you need to make sure that the crown is always there and that is ditched properly. And, like, we've had situations over the years that the Good Samaritan has gone out and thought he's done well, but he's created more problems than he solved with, you know, filling in a culvert or blocking off a ditch, taking the crown off the trail. Next thing, we got pooled water. So anytime there's work being done on the trailway, a permit needs to be drawn through Parks and Natural Areas Division. There's a scope of work that has to be attached to it, and it has to be adhered to it. So, you know, it's not as simple as just going out and cutting back a bit of brush or grading it.
Is anybody getting paid to do the grooming, or are these people all volunteering?
You'd have to talk to the Snowmobile Federation about that, because Newfoundland Trailways doesn't groom. So okay. I don't know how they work, if they pay their groomer operators or not.
I'm not sure either, but there's also the consideration that people are loath possibly to buy, I don't know if the right word is a membership or what have you, but the money's collected as part and parcel with delivering you rideable groomed trails.
One on the snowmobile trails, yes. And once again, that's a snowmobile thing. Newfoundland Trailways, there's no permit to use the trailway. And, of course, Newfoundland Trailway Council does not sell permits or anything like that.
Right. Understood. So the summary of the call here this morning is if you're an ATV rider and you're considering getting on one of the groomed trails, just make sure that it's ready for your ATV tires versus get on there and rip it to shreds after all the hard work's been done.
Exactly, but not all the groomed trails, Paddy. Just the Newfoundland Trailway.
Just Newfoundland Trailway. Fair enough.
The groomed trailways off the trailway are snowmobile trails, and you're not allowed on them. And I understand that. The trailway is the exception, and we're just saying, show some, good judgment. Some common sense and good judgment. Stay off them, especially like you're looking at it. I don't know how long this is going to last here now with this snow, but this snow is pretty soft. And they're probably not even grooming in certain areas, but in the areas where they're grooming, stay off it.
Fair enough, and fair advice and suggestion or recommendation, Rick. Appreciate the time.
Thanks for it, Paddy. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye. Rick Nosery, the president of Newfoundland Labrador Trailways. Very quickly before we get to the news break, over this past weekend, there was 4 women from this province were amongst the top business leaders in Atlantic Canada. There was an event Thursday night in Moncton. 25 women were named Atlantic Canada's 25 most powerful women in business, and that, of course, is brought to you by Atlantic Business Magazine. Of the 4 from this province, Joanna Brown, who's a sales strategist with Rivet. That's a new sales consulting practice right here in the province. Their goal is to help entrepreneurs launch their business. In addition, Heather Dalton, who's been long a partner at M5 Group of Companies. Taylor Giovannini is the president and CEO of Oceanic Relief. They're in the cannabis business. They've got 9 retail outlets in the province, including a big growth facility down in Burin. And the 4th of those on that list is Jennifer Williams, president and CEO of Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro. Congratulations to those 4 ladies on their recognition at Atlantic Business Magazine's event this past Thursday in Moncton. So Jennifer Williams, of course, been at Hydro for some 10 years, 3 years at the helm as the CEO. So always lots of conversation and questions to be had between folks at Newfoundland Power and Newfoundland Labrador Hydro. It's probably time that we get Miss Williams back on the program. Maybe even just fundamentals like the update after the high megawatt Labrador Island Link test that happened last week. Didn't hear any big stories of big outages or lines being tripped, so get an update there. Also, we know that there were some 8 towers damaged out around Terra Nova with a weather event. The status of the repair out there would be helpful because, of course, remember, this has long been understood as a potential problem. Liberty Consulting did a great job in giving this type of information to the PUB. Liberty Consulting has now been replaced. I can't remember the name of the new outfit, but they talk about the potential for prolonged brownouts, rolling brownouts and or blackouts if there's damage in some of the real rural, isolated, hard to get to sections through the long-range mountains where the transmission lines are. I mean, in this case, the equipment was trying to plow access for quite a long time before they even began repairs. So that's one of the distinct problems built in with that 1,100 kilometers worth of transmission lines coming from Muskrat Falls across the strait and then down the long-range mountains, eventually making its way to Soldiers Pond. Let's take a break for the news. When we come back, still tons of time to speak with you. Don't go away.
Saturday morning, join us for the Irish Newfoundland Show. Send your request to irishnl@vocm.com or submit them online at vocm.com.
Welcome back to the program. I asked the question of Rick Nosery from Newfoundland Trailways about the groomers getting paid, and of course that's not his operation. We're talking about the snowmobile trails, and a listener said yes, the groomer operators do get paid. I figured as much, but wanted to throw it out there. Interesting story that I think Brian led the newscast with, and it was about smart meters. Now, we had the province's consumer advocate Dennis Brown on the program last week talking about exactly that. This is not a new concept. It's in place in various jurisdictions right across North America, and the basics are, if you have a smart meter, which also you can buy a smart meter, but it has to be they have to do an upgrade at Newfoundland Power to a system called AIM to make sure that you're able to get discounts for using off-peak hours. So basically, the big demand is in the morning when we're all getting ready to go to work and go to school. Then, of course, it peaks again at supper time when everyone's, preparing supper and possibly throwing on the dishwasher and those types of things. So the concept is, if you wanted to save some money and take some pressure off the system, system at the same time, you would do things like throw in your laundry at 10 o'clock at night and or turn on the dishwasher before you go to bed versus directly after supper itself. So the consumer advocate, Mr. Brown, says that everyone in the province should have access to a smart meter. I agree. I think it's beneficial to me as the ratepayer, but also to Newfoundland Power as the provider. So Newfoundland Power says for the required upgrades on site, it would cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $100 million. Mr. Brown questions that number. He goes on to say that we've already provided them with some $32 million for these potential types of upgrades. So I don't think that conversation is going away. Also, not that long ago, had the consumer advocate on the show talking about the installation of these rapid chargers. So, you know, his concept is that ratepayers in general should not be on the hook for installing these electric vehicle rapid chargers because not everybody is using them. I kind of get that, but at what point is there the critical mass required that would be okay by the consumer advocate's position that there would be a general ratepayer paying for these types of chargers? At this moment, I mean, we're talking about pretty small numbers. Year over year, the number of electric vehicles registered with the province and or hybrids is growing. There has been a bit of a slump for international demand. So as a result of that, we've seen some slumping of the mineral prices required. So if you want to take on either of those angles, let's do it. When it comes to the slump in those prices, look, people are going to invest in mines and or mine expansion, which takes a fairly long time in this country to get eventual approval. So it's not like this is a today concern. But what does it look like for that type of demand to continue in the future? Because the 2023 numbers on some of the notable critical minerals really kind of fell off the shelf. So again, just for your consideration, the price of lithium last year dropped by 82.3%. I mean, that's a huge decrease in the amount of money people are willing to pay for lithium. Nickel dropped 29.1%, cobalt 38.5%, manganese 22.3%. This all comes from Benchmark Intelligence. They point to a couple of direct issues there. That's the subdued Chinese demand and a weaker than expected electric vehicle market. And again, when people say electric vehicles, and when I say it, I shouldn't say people, when I say it, it's not go get an electric vehicle. It's just part of the international conversation about the consideration that some are giving too. And more people over time are doing exactly that. The numbers, for instance, on the west coast of the country have grown exponentially. Year over year. So they've become quite popular. Now there's lots of industries and lots of terrain and remote locations where it probably might not work for you as it's currently constructed today. Fair enough. Read a story from Europe over the weekend. One of the big issues regarding the price point to get into an electric vehicle, if you're so inclined, is the manufacturing process, not just of the battery and the different components, but at the assembly line stage. So the thought coming from some of the analysts in Europe is that by 2027, those costs, they figure out how to streamline it, the process became better understood. They are guesstimating that the manufacturing cost by 2027 will be similar or less than an internal combustion engine vehicle. So once again, for clarification, I'm not suggesting you should do whatever you want with your own hard-earned money. If you're so inclined and you like the look and the feel and the reduction in emissions and or, importantly, the cost of operating. Whether or not you like them or not, some things are indisputable. The cost of operating an electric vehicle is vastly less than it is with operating our internal combustion engines. And again, I'm not preaching at you because I don't have one, right? I have a gas-powered vehicle. For now, at some time in the future, I might consider it when it comes back to earth a little bit and some of the bugs are ironed out and the advent of a solid-state battery, some of those things that I think many people who are looking at the market are having these types of considerations and or conversations. So there you go. So, but the big issue with the slumping mineral price is what does that mean for investment? We are uniquely positioned here in this province and in this country. On the national front, they unfortunately talk about the opportunities in northern Quebec and in northern Ontario, and we should absolutely be part of that conversation because we've got them. We've got them in droves. We have ample opportunity to see extensive expansion in the mining industry in this province, but with the prices where they are, you can imagine that the investors and the business models that were being discussed in Toronto at last week's mining conference, you won't see a lot of that big capital investment flowing very quickly because of the obvious. If people aren't getting that kind of money for the minerals themselves and the upfront cost with opening or expanding a mine, it just doesn't jibe. Again, how does that get factored in with things like, for instance, the time it takes to get final approval on a mine? The number being thrown around all the time is about 10 years. Not so sure exactly how accurate that might be, but certainly it does take years before you get final approval for something like a mining operation. And when we're talking about things like uranium, for instance, it's not just a provincial jurisdiction that has to be considered, because things like uranium are federally regulated. So it's not all fundamentally all the responsibility of the province. And capital investment, of which people look to bullish opportunities in the mining sector, maybe not going to hear some of those big announcements of injection of capital investment this year. Let's check in on the Twitter. We're VOCM Openline. You can follow us there. Oh, and mentions of things like potential for rentals to be found in retirement homes. Someone wanted me to put this back out there, and I will, even though it gets me a few knocks, is things like home share programs. Importantly, no one is going to be forced into these programs. The government is not telling people who are seniors that you need to rent out a room in your house. That's not what's happening. It's the possibility for a double-edged sword here. For instance, if we're talking about it being offered by the university, that would be potential for an international student to rent at a reduced price a room in your home. In exchange, there would be some household chores that would be part of that negotiation up front. Shovel in the driveway, doing household chores, taking out the garbage, fundamental things like that, mowing the lawn or painting the fence, whatever it is, because that's part of a negotiated position. And there is a vetting process that takes place. So yes, that can indeed be part of the conversation. And again, if you're not comfortable with any type of consideration of having someone unknown to you living with you, fair enough, I totally get it. But for some, a bit of help around the house, a bit of company, because we have talked many times on this program about what loneliness means and self-isolation means for your overall health and well-being. So yes, someone said, why don't you put that back out there? Just did. Put it back out there. All right, we're on Twitter. We're VOCM Openline. Oops, I broke my pen. Follow us there. Suggest topics and or chime in on what you've heard on the program. Email address is openline@vocm.com. When we come back from our final break of the morning, we're looking forward to speaking with you about whatever's on your mind. Don't go away. Welcome back. Let's go to line number 2. Mike, you're on the air.
How are you today, Paddy?
Grand today. How about you?
Pretty good, sir.
Good.
I just want to call in that was there probably Thursday or Friday last week was on the news. I don't know if you heard that about a young fella out towards Stair Lake that just after get his license and everything, and he was doing 150 plus on the highway, passing on a solid line, and that's when the police, I don't know if they're coming in the other direction or spotted him and pulled him in. Apparently took his license, obviously, and impounded his car. And I think for somebody to just get their license like that, and where's that going to help with insurance and everything else now once that goes back?
Well, he's doomed, and too bad about him.
Yes. I think today, to the once younger people get their license and starting off like that, I think their license should be taken away for a couple of years, just to teach them a lesson that they're like a loaded gun on the highway when they're doing that speed and everything else. There's enough accidents on our highway any given time, let alone somebody speeding that much, eh?
You have to imagine that the majority of collisions on the highway is due to speed. Now, there could be instances where someone falls asleep or they could be distracted by their phone or what have you, but speed quite often, and more often than not, plays a role in some of these collisions. So look, what the penalty or the punishment should be, I've got no problem with what you just suggested. If I'm, and I don't know if we have to be only about folks who are very new to having their license and new to driving, because you can be 40 years old and do the same thing. I think the penalties are a bit too lenient, to be honest with you.
Absolutely, and like I said, for somebody to be on the highway just after getting their license, doing 150, that's crazy. Passing traffic on a solid line, and just after getting their license, I don't know. That's, to me, it's just crazy that person even got their license.
Well, we're all on our best behavior when we're being tested, right? We're all on our best behavior when someone's watching, especially a police car or a police officer. But, people talk about punishment matching the crime, and in this case we're talking speeding. if people think that you simply jack up the amount that the fine is, that it's going to slow people down, maybe, but we already know that so many people who get tickets don't pay them in the first place. The real penalty is having your car impounded and how long that would happen, or how long your license is taken away from you. They're the real punitive areas where I think it would slow people down, possibly. If you knew that if you're going 150, wherever, highways, say for instance at this point, if you're going 150 or higher and you lose your car for a year, I think people would think twice when the stories hit the news that, well, there's another vehicle gone for a year. And imagine if it's like, for instance, your parents' car, what kind of trouble that could present to a new driver. So I think that versus just jacking up the fines is a way to potentially slow people down.
Absolutely, Paddy. I remember years ago, and they called in at that time. I was down to court one time to do somebody contested ticket when I was working, say, just parking lot ticket. And there was a guy there at the time. When he went up before the judge, he owed $58,000 in the fines and getting stopped, I guess, no license and whatever.
Yeah, there's lots.
$58,000 he had built up for that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Now
it's not going to live long enough to pay for it.
Oh, we're never getting blood out of that turnip. No. Sometimes when we hear those stories, though, we automatically think that these are all fines that are outstanding, but they could be a variety of things. He could have been busted with contraband tobacco. There's all kinds of fines that get lumped into that big number. It's all not necessarily regarding, motor vehicle related offences and fines.
Yeah. And Paddy, the only thing stopped him at the time, I'm thinking somewhat for not getting any jail time that they used to do, was the fact that he set up with the Crown or whatever to make payments before he went and seen the judge and backed that up. He's making $200 payment a month now and that. Like Judge said, you're not going to live long enough to pay it. But then again, he slapped another $600-700 fine on him, and the guy gets to walk again. I guess to me, it's just crazy. I think the prison that they're talking about, the jail or prison that they need to build, I think is well long overdue. And I think if they had one built big enough, as to know, or they said with Dark, build it, they will come.
Yeah, no doubt about it. But then, we have to factor in somewhere in the neighborhood of 60% of the folks down at Her Majesty's Penitentiary haven't been found guilty of anything. They're on remand. So whether, when you build a new prison, if there's an additional that's simply a remand facility, because, just think of the story last week. The guy who should have been in prison without bail, who was stalking and threatening and hurting and hitting his wife, released on conditions, she's dead. So there's lots of reasons why people are in there. Not necessarily everybody in there is a violent criminal or has been charged with a violent offence, but for some, the way we deal with bail is not working. It's just not. No. The result is this lady, mother of 5, is dead.
Absolutely. And it's crazy.
It is.
Crazy. And it's no difference, Paddy, than people out there doing all the breaking and enters and everything else and stuff. They'll go and they'll get a slap on the wrist. Basically, to me, it's like the judge saying, okay, you're free to go back and do what you're doing, because we're going to see you again. I guess they're out there. They're out there big time.
Yeah, and so much of that, of course, is driven by drugs.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Anyway, Paddy gets a chance, maybe even tomorrow, just look up that if you like, just to get the full story on the young fella, like I said, and the speed and the police involved and the whole bit.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I saw that story last week, but I'll have another look to refresh my memory.
All right, Paddy, you have a good day.
You too, Mike. All the best.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, likely the final word goes to line 1. Otto, you're on the air.
Hello.
Hi there.
Paddy, Otto.
Yes, sir.
I haven't got the parcel yet, Paddy.
Don't know what to tell you. I'll keep an eye on my mailbox. And that said, I haven't checked my mailbox in maybe about a week, so who knows? It might even be in there if indeed I had shagged up your address, because my address is on it. So fingers crossed, if I get it, I'll fix it and I'll put it right back out there.
Right on, buddy. Ain't staying we in one?
No, we weren't, because the hill didn't even open on Saturday, so we were thinking about going, but it didn't open.
Okay, we'll another storm now right from Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, snow.
Yeah, it's going to be messy in here. We're talking about mostly rain in here.
We got snow started now, right?
Okay.
Barry Fordham was talking about this device on fox and coyote and lynx snares, eh?
Okay.
It's called a breakaway jayhawk. Snare jayhawk designed to release outdoor deer and livestock, but old coyotes. Works with a wide variety of locks, improves design over the ordinary S-lock. designed to be used with the University Dispatch Spring to currently made snares into breakaway dispatch. Which is called a breakaway jail.
Yeah, I've seen them. We've had some.
I got a trapper's book there from Southeast Outdoor Supplies from the States.
Okay.
Now they cost $2.95 a dozen down the States. That's double there, right? Now we got to buy our wire, our rocks, our swivels, our furrows. I mean, it's getting expensive to be trapper, eh?
No doubt.
I plan on going trapping this year. I'm 80 years old. So my grandson, he's getting his license this year, I think. Quality end, I believe, in May. So we're going trapping because there's a lot of animals now, and there's nothing for them to eat. Like a mink needs 200 rabbits a year to survive. That's a lot of rabbits, buddy.
It is a lot of rabbits. The problem people were having with the rabbits and the snares is that the rabbits were breaking them off. So, of course, you're only allowed to use 22-gauge brass or the 6-strand pitcher cord. And, I went to read a little bit about it. They say that the field testing of those wires say that they were successful, let me see if I can remember, 75% of the time when we're talking about rabbits, and they released martins 90% of the time. But people are complaining about those snares all the time.
Yeah, because, like I said, I spend more time in the woods nighttime than some others in the day. I haven't seen a martin track yet. Now, on the West Coast, in Central probably is martins, but not on the East Coast, I haven't seen no tracks.
Apparently, the martins have spread out where they're populated, and apparently the pine martin is increasing their population, which is good news because people were quite worried about the potential for them to become at high risk for extinction, but apparently they're bouncing back, which is good.
Now, the war they're making today, like one time, I know we had war braided up near war, eh? And two coins of that was used for link to braid it. It was hard to tell, but the stainless steel is a war for rabbits, eh? Not the brass. That's garbage, eh?
Apparently so, yeah.
You lose a lot of rabbits, you get them bust off, eh? And that's unreal. I don't know why they come up to ban that, because, like I said, there's no martins, not on the East Coast, on the West Coast probably.
And apparently out in Terra Nova.
I've been trapping 40 years probably.
Yeah, apparently there's martins in Terra Nova, so not too far away from where you are.
That's what they're saying, but I doubt it, buddy. I've been up in Terra Nova over the years, moose hunting. I haven't seen a martin yet. Anyhow, that jay oak,
yeah,
it's $2.85 a dozen down in the States. Well, that's $4 or $5 here, right? Now, what was Barry saying about that's going to be mandatory?
I can't remember right at this moment in time. But I'll figure it out.
Again, because, I mean, there's enough gear on the blocks and swivels and furrows and all that crap, eh? I mean, what you trying to cut out trapping or what? I say, buddy, must be working with Greenpeace. I'm a trapping all my life. I never snared a caribou or a moose yet.
No, they should be easy enough to break away from what the traditional snares are. Otto, you've had the last word. We're just about out of time. Stay in touch.
Well, if you're coming this way, Barry, Paddy, come up, for God's sake.
I will. Next time I'm out there, I'll look you up.
And Leon, if you're up to Walmart, drop in.
Fair enough. Appreciate the call, Otto.
Buddy. Doing a good job, buddy.
Thanks, man. All the best.
Give it up, buddy.
Okay, thank you, Otto.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye. Very quickly, before we run out of time, want to throw out a very quick 50th happy birthday to Carla Reed, apparently long-time listener to the program. Just got an email from Jason, asked me to put that out there. So, Carla Reed, happy 50th birthday. Hope you have a fantastic day. All right, good show today. Big thanks to all hands who support the program, and we will indeed pick up this conversation tomorrow morning right here on VOCM and Big Land FM's Open Line. On behalf of the producer, David Williams, I'm your host, Paddy Daly. Have yourself a safe, fun, happy day. We'll talk in the morning. Bye-bye.